Okay, we're off.
New Vicks Burst Defense helps trap, inactivate, and remove cold viruses.
Bloody heads.
Became the heir to the throne.
Somewhere,
Hi, Diane. Good to see you.
rainbow, whereby there's a land that I heard of once in a lullaby. Well, somewhere over the rainbow, skies are blue, and the dreams that you dare to dream, they really do come true. Someday I wish upon a star and wake up where the clouds are far behind me, where troubles melt like lemon drops away above the chimney tops. That's where you find me. Well, somewhere over the rainbow, skies are blue, and the dreams that you dare to dream,
Hey, Trace. Good to see you.
really do come true. Someday I wish upon a star, and I wake up where the clouds are far behind me, where troubles melt like lemon drops away above the chimney tops. That's where you find me. Well, somewhere over the rainbow, Your birds fly over the rainbow. Why, little why can't I? If birds fly over the rainbow.
Yeah, I know you are, Trace. I'm sorry I go so late. Our timelines are so out. I wish I went early enough so you could join in, but the time don't allow it.
Then oh why can't
Hi, Han. Good to see you. Okay, hang on. It's a sharpening report mainly. And the first one is, hang on, amazing calendar. Where is it? Oh, live videos. That's the one.
Oh yeah, tyres, like dogs, come in all shapes and sizes. We have tyres for cars, woof, SUVs, woof, and 4x4s, woof. Plus we have all the best brands, priced to keep your tail wagging. Need tyres? Get
then you can do that there as well. And the reason that we usually set it up like that, it's not a big money grab. It's because YouTube has deleted our videos, has even deleted an entire channel, which was 8 years of ministry efforts just kind of down the drain. So now we back everything up to the website. But of course, with storage space and all that, it costs quite a bit of money. So people who believe in the ministry and want to support what we do, you guys can help out by getting a membership. And again, if you're not sure, just get a trial version and check us out. You get a free week. So and even if you don't, a lot of the stuff that we have is available on YouTube anyway. But if you remember, you do get early access and you do get full videos that we do. A lot of the content we do, we can't put on YouTube because they've deleted it before. For example, anytime we mention the name of the country that is the Holy Land in the Bible, that sometimes triggers YouTube. So we have to be careful of all that. All right. All that being said, we have a very exciting episode for you today. We are going to be talking all about the Dead Sea Scroll calendar. And this is why we're making this free for everybody, because our special guest today is Dr. Ken Johnson, and he and I actually have a print version of the Dead Sea Scroll calendar. If you're brand new to it, don't worry about it. We're going to explain what this all means. But we have a print version available that we want to tell you about and kind of explain how this is different than our Gregorian calendar, how this shows up in the Bible, and really you can use this to help explain a lot of the kind of strange things in the Bible, like the day counts in prophecy, or the flood of Noah, and how all that works in those 5 months. So there's a lot of things that this can be used for. I found it to be an invaluable tool. And up until just recently, the only version that was available was online. And there is a free version online, dsscalendar.org, that Dr. Ken Johnson has put together. But we also have kind of come together to make this print version available if you want one on your wall or anything like that on your desk. There's a bunch of different versions available, and we'll get into all that. But before we do, I should probably introduce our guest, Dr. Ken Johnson. How are you doing today, Ken?
Doing real well. How are you?
I'm doing fantastic. Really excited, as always, to be talking with you again. Thank you so much for taking the time to come back on the show.
Thank you.
All right. Well, so as I've said, people are already interested in the calendar. There's links in the description below. Now, I do want to tell people, if you do get a calendar, this supports both Ken's and my ministry. So it supports Daily Renegade and BibleFacts.org. So if you like one and not the other, then that's just something to consider. But most likely, I imagine the audience probably likes both ministries. So it does go to help support that. So this is the Ancient Dead Sea Scroll calendar. Talk to us kind of about how you put this thing together originally online. Like, how did you piece this together? Because I know there's fragments from the Dead Sea Scrolls, like in the Book of Enoch and things like that you've kind of been able to piece together and figure out. How did this whole thing start for you with putting this calendar together?
Well, I've been going through the Dead Sea Scrolls for quite a while, and come to find out their calendar is very important to them. It teaches on prophecy and several other things. And it's the basic calendar that we have in the Bible, like Passover is the 14th of Nisan. Question is, when does the year start, or when is the first of Nisan? And the modern Jewish calendar goes by a lunar cycle. And so I didn't think much about it at first. I thought, whatever, give or take a week, who cares? But then it kept being hit more and more. The people that use the lunar calendar are the sons of darkness. We are the sons of light. We use the proper calendar. And you see that language all through the New Testament. So I finally decided it's probably pretty important to examine. Just like anything else, it may or may not be. One of the things we recently did and are still working on is pulling all of the quotes from the Old Testament, from the Dead Sea Scrolls, and kind of rebuilding their Old Testament just to make sure it's the same Old Testament. So that might be a waste of time, but praise the Lord, it's a waste of time, nothing weird. So same thing with the calendar. I got working on it, and it's really straightforward and easy to use. The only question was the leap year stuff, because we have 365 and a quarter days, actually 365.2422, I think. So we have this intricate system of every so many days we add a leap. Every 4 years we add a leap day, unless it's a certain thing, then we skip it. So the lunar calendar, you basically always start with a full moon, so it can be up to a month off, which is just very strange. And the complicated part is that system. And so I tried for about a month using Excel spreadsheets, lunar calculations, things like that. Twice. I had to take a break from it, and I just couldn't figure it out because, number one, it's too simple. Number two, I was using a decimal system, and if I would have done 1/7 to figure out weeks, it would have worked. But I was using 0.1, 1/4, and
The new destination for motorsport is Stan's Ford. Speed Series, Formula E, IndyCar.
And of course, it never comes out right. 3/3 put together is 9.999. And I'm going through this thing looking like, where's the rest of the dates? It doesn't match, So anyway, thankfully, about a year and a half ago, the University of Tel Aviv were able to use all sorts of different technologies to figure out which pieces went with which scroll, and able to piece it back together. And it was really funny because they said that there's this new word that's dropped out of modern Hebrew called a tekufa, and they had to go back and figure out what a tekufa was. And because it's in the calendar, but it's really amazing. So with their calculations, I was able to figure out how the calendar actually works, and the years are easy because of all the other scrolls. So what I did, as soon as I figured out how it would work, I wrote a PHP program, which is a backend for a website. And what it does is, if you go to Dead Sea Scroll or dsscalendar.org, what it does is it grabs from you the current date and your time zone. So because like right now, I usually broadcast in the evenings around 7 o'clock Central. By that time, we're already into the next day in Israel. Mm-hmm. So it matches it up to Israeli Standard Time and then recreates the calendar based on the current date, Gregorian. So it just recreates the calendar on the fly. And it's pretty easy. It's like this year is a leap year, so we have a leap week is how that works. But that's how I got into it, and it turned out to be fairly important for prophecy.
Yeah, definitely. It's amazing, too, that the year that we started with the print calendar is a leap week year, which is a great year to start on because it's something a little unique, and we'll definitely get into that. But you mentioned something about the lunar calendar, and they're on the modern Jewish calendar, which came from the Pharisee calendar back from, you see that in the Gospels and stuff like that, which actually the two calendar system is why there's some discrepancies in, like, say, the Gospel of John and stuff like that. But according to the modern Jewish calendar, we're in the year 58 something. But the Dead Sea calendar says that we're in 5946 AM, which people can see right here, 59:46 a.m., which to us would be 2021 to 2022. What's the significance of the years? How is that different between the Dead Sea Scroll calendar, the Pharisee or modern Jewish calendar, and our Gregorian calendar today?
Well, real briefly, what happened was our Gregorian calendar dates from the time of Christ when he was born. And if we're off, we might be off, give or take a year or two or whatever, but that's what it's supposed to date from. The Dead Sea Scroll calendar and the Pharisee calendar both date from the year of creation. So God created Adam. 130 years later, he had Seth, and you can just kind of see this in Genesis 5 and several places in Genesis. But what happens is it's accurate according to the Dead Sea Scrolls, but the Pharisees got off, and the story is only recorded in an ancient historical book called the Ancient Seder Olam. The story is that after Messiah came, several of the Jews rejected Messiah, and the problem is that Daniel chapter 9 points from a certain decree, so many days Messiah dies, and it is absolutely perfect. It comes out to be April 6, 32 AD, which if you're using the lunar calendar doesn't look like it fits, but it does with the proper one. Anyway, so to get away from this, there was this rabbi named Yoshi that said, well, it probably doesn't match that. It's probably from the destruction of the temple to the destruction of the other temple. But now you got a 40-year discrepancy, so he tries to change certain things. And he tries it once, and it just flat doesn't work because it messes up too many other things. He comes up with a second theory, totally different. That still doesn't work too well. So it's totally rejected. But then later on, somewhere along the line, they decide to tweak it a little bit and use Rabbi Yoshi's second theory. And basically what they did is they said Cyrus, Ahasuerus, and Darius, three prominent people in the Persian court, were actually names or titles, and they're actually the same guy. And so they shrink the 200-year occupation down to 20 years, and then they make a few things a little bit bigger. So the whole thing, when it's all said and done, we're off like 164 years. But that's what happened. And it's interesting that there is, if you look at the Talmud, for instance, and it's talking about dates, it'll always say, go to the Seder Olam, because it's like how we base everything. And the Seder Olam rejects Messiah. Well, the guy that wrote the Seder didn't reject the Messiah. He was very respectful to his elders, but he basically said, we all know what happened. We all know what Yoshi tried to do because of Messiah. So it's really interesting to see that. So we published that too for you, but that's how the discrepancy got started. And so you can very easily, several different ways, figure out what the year is. You can go back and add Genesis 5, Genesis 11, the numbers from Kings, and get up to the time of the destruction of Solomon's temple, which everybody agrees is either 536 or 537 BC. Everybody agrees on that. So then you can plug it in and know, give or take a year, what this year is. But then the cool thing about it is there's multiple manuscripts that do that, and they all come out with the same date, give or take a couple of years. But then we have a Dead Sea Scroll that tells us that the Messiah came to die for our sins, and the event occurs in what we call 32 AD. But they say it on their calendar system, so that locks the whole thing in. And again, it's the exact same date again. So it's really interesting to see that. So we know that we are much closer to the year 6000. So, if the Messiah or the second coming was to be the year 6000, on the modern Jewish calendar, it'd be about 200 years away. And I think we all agree that I don't think it's going to be another 200 years before Messiah comes.
Right.
Anyway, on this calendar, we are 54 or 53 years away. And of course, there's some talk about him. The rapture, of course, comes before that time, and who knows when that would happen.
Yeah, absolutely. And like you mentioned, too, it's really important with prophecy, and especially in terms of ages. Even some church fathers talked about this idea of 6,000 years of human history before the millennial reign, that the whole thing is set up like a week. And you can really see that in this calendar. I want to mention, too, we have not only the wall calendar that I held up, but we also have poster versions. If people want something a little cheaper and smaller, there's a couple different poster versions. We also have desk calendars available as well. We have a couple of these. There's one that actually just fits in a CD case, and they're cards that you can take out and use. And then there's an actual desk calendar as well. And people can check that out at the links in the description below. You can go to dailyrenegade.com or dsscalendar.com, biblefacts.org. We've really put it all over the place to make it easy for people to find. But the easiest way is if you're watching this on YouTube, just click on the link in the description below. And when you open it up, we have on the top, if people can see that, we have on the top the Dead Sea Scroll calendar, but then on the bottom we actually have our normal Gregorian calendar here. This, if people like this model, this is the square version. It just says square calendar on in the store, but this actually has, you know, pictures for St. Patrick's Day or whatever. But on the top here, this is mainly what I wanted to focus on. When we first start off, we find out the beginning of the new year in the Dead Sea Scroll calendar is totally different than how we normally would do it. So they have first a Tekufa Nisan, but that's not technically New Year, the day after the Spring Day of Remembrance, which this year was March 17th. But to them it would be Nisan 1 or Abib 1. Can you talk about the difference between like what a Tekufa is and how that's different than the first day of the year, even though it looks like it's the first day of the year, but it's not exactly. Can you explain that?
Yeah, sure. The way the calendar works basically is it's a 364-day calendar. And people look at that at first and go, well, that's wrong. There's no way that could be. And we're not talking about the tropical year, which again is 365.2422 days. And apparently, according to the scrolls, it's been that way even pre-flood, so it hasn't changed. But when we have our 365-day year, we can't have any more because you can't have a part of a day in a calendar. So you got to wait till there's at least one extra day, and then we add a leap.
Do the Dodo do-over with reliable NBN plans from $55 a month. You can reno your whole home. Internet. You'll even get the first month free. This could use a do-over.
A leap day. That's what we do. And the thing is, though, a 365-day calendar, it keeps the spring equinox perfect. It's always March 20th, so that's good. But it messes up the weeks. If I was to ask you, when was New Year's this year? Was it a Tuesday or Wednesday? You'd say, I don't know. We'd have to look it up. It's different every year. So it messes up the Sabbath cycle. And the most important thing of the calendar, the entire thing is based on a 7-day cycle, 6 days of work and a day to worship the Lord, a Sabbath. And not that we as Christians have to keep the Jewish Sabbath the way that they did, but the calendar's based on this. And this is why it says that it's important. It's a set-apart day, a set-apart system in Genesis. So the way it works, though, is if you have a 364-day calendar, that's divisible by 752 times evenly. So you've got exactly 52 weeks, sets of 7. So every New Year's is a Wednesday. It's the Wednesday closest to the spring equinox. And what happens is every year you'll go back 1 or 2 days. And as soon as you get more than 3 days away from the equinox, you simply add a week. That's that leap week. And so now you're over here and you'll slowly start going back. And that's how they keep the 7-day cycle perfect. So ours is more accurate if you don't care about a Sabbath and you just want the spring equinox. But if you need to keep the 7-day Sabbath cycle proper, then that's the way to do it. And so the way that this works is this equinox is the key to starting the year. So you want the equinox, but if you started on the equinox, again, next year you'd be like 1 day behind, and then the next day you'd be 2 days behind. So it's always different, and you have to have that leap week. But they always start it on Wednesday because they said that's when the calendar started. If you go to Genesis, there's the first day of creation, which was light, and the second day of creation, third, and then on the fourth day of creation, which is our Wednesday, if we're starting from the first day of the week, then what you're doing is Sunday, Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday. That's when the sun and the moon were created. So they said, okay, that's the perfect time to start the calendar, when the sun and the moon was created. So from that time forward, we always have that. And each season always ends or always begins ends rather on a Wednesday. So that's kind of neat to see too. But the thing is, though, we see constantly in the scriptures a 360-day calendar or a 360-day year. And that's always been confusing to people, but now we understand it with that, with the Dead Sea Scroll calendar. And the way that works is that there's exactly 12 months of 30 days apiece. It's real simple. There's no extra days or anything. 12 months, 30 days. That's 360 days. Well, outside of the calendar months, there are these, they call them tekufa. We would say it's a spring or a fall equinox and a winter or summer solstice. But the solstices and the equinoxes are 4 points on the calendar, and they're just called tekufas. And it's the time for a celebration. So the tekufas are outside the months. So you've got 360 days in the months, and then just 4 pointers, the starting of the seasons. So that's 364, which is divisible by 52. And that's the way the system works. And it's really, it seems complicated at first, but it's really very, very simple compared to all of our Gregorian stuff.
Yeah, I totally agree. And usually I am terrible with numbers and math and stuff, and I'm able to understand this fine. So if I can understand it, anybody out there will be able to as well. And I love that we're doing this on a leap week year. So at the very end of this calendar, when people get to the last month, they'll actually see at the bottom the leap week. And that leap week is really important, especially in terms of prophecy. When I was trying to figure out like the day counts from Daniel and then in Revelation, it talks about these Moedim cycles from festival to festival. A lot of people, a lot of Bible scholars today think that that's a calendar year. That's not exactly accurate. It's a festival cycle, and so what that means is half of a full festival cycle would be a calendar year, but half might not be. It depends which festival day we're talking about. And that leap thing, that leap week is so important because if you think about a set of 7 years like the tribulation, somewhere in there's going to be at least one leap week a year, and that could affect the counts. So what in my research, the last 3.5 years doesn't seem to have a leap week in it because all the counts work out perfectly. But the first 3.5 years, it seems like there's something there. And we don't have a whole lot of day counts about the first 3.5, but we do have something in terms of the ministry of the 2 witnesses if they come in the first half of the tribulation. Now, if they come in the second half, I can't figure out the numbers. They don't add up right. But if they come in the first half, and I believe they do, and if their appearance has something to do with the Festival of New Oil, which we'll talk about in a minute, or the wood offering, which we'll talk about in a minute, if you do the day count with the leap week, then it puts them dying and being raised up around Purim, which is interesting because that's it's not like an Old Testament festival thing. It came later, but it's a celebration where in Israel they're giving each other gifts. They're out in the street. It's a big celebration. Well, that's what you see in that prophecy. They give each other gifts at the time of the killing of these 2 witnesses. That might be a reach. It might not have anything to do with that, but I found that to be interesting. That's just one of many little kind of things that you can pull together with a calendar like this. So we start off the year with the Tekuf and Nisan, and then the first day, which is Spring Day of Remembrance. And then we find 2 weeks later, we have Passover and then the unleavened bread week. Now, what's interesting about this is this actually helps explain the whole discrepancy between, when did Jesus die? When did he raise? How do you fit 3 days in there with the resurrection? How does this calendar explain that?
The way that it works is the prophecy says 3 days and 3 nights. And some people have thought, well, maybe just a part of one would count. Well, even if you have a part of one day and a part of one night, you still got at least 2 in there. And so if he dies on Friday and resurrects before Sunday morning, there's not even 2 full days in there. And so it's always been kind of a discrepancy. The problem is that there are weekly Sabbaths, and that's what everybody's thinking of. That's Friday night and Saturday. But there's also a high Sabbath. So a low Sabbath is a weekly Sabbath. A high Sabbath is one of the festivals. So when you just say the Sabbath is coming, we need to prepare for, dinner or whatever, it could be the normal weekly Friday night dinner, or it could be a holiday coming up. And so it's just like we take weekends off and we don't work. We work Monday through Friday normally, and you take a weekend off. That's normal every week. But then once in a while you have Christmas, and you probably get Christmas off too. That might be a Wednesday or Thursday or whatever. So Passover, the preparation day, is one of the days that it says you shall not work. And so the 14th of Nisan is the preparation for the Passover. So when you prepare everything and you start the Passover week, basically. And so understanding that when it says the Sabbath was upcoming, or the preparation day of Passover, and it was a Sabbath, it's either Friday or it's whenever the Passover was. And on the Dead Sea Scroll calendar, that's always Tuesday's preparation day. And so Tuesday night to Wednesday, basically. And so anyway, it's either that one of the two. And Friday, of course, can't work. So the way this works is he gets things together, and he has the meal, which is normally done on the 14th, but on the 9th of the 14th. So Tuesday night, then, according to our calendar, he would be having dinner with his disciples. That's the last part of John. And then he goes out and he's arrested and tried and put on the cross the next day, which is Wednesday. And then he's executed, he dies. They take him down before the high Sabbath starts, which is the 15th, when they couldn't have corpses hanging around. So they put him in the tomb and seal it. And then that starts the 3 days and 3 nights. So you've got Wednesday night and Thursday, Thursday night and Friday, Friday night and Saturday. So he can resurrect anytime after dusk on Saturday night. And of course, when they went there Sunday morning, the tomb had already been opened and he was already gone. So that fits perfectly with what we're told in the New Testament. So it's just not the Friday Sabbath, it's the Sabbath associated with Passover. And of course, it's always...
When I was diagnosed, I had an almost 18-month-old and a 2.5-year-old. It wasn't until I was putting my son to bed one night.
Always on the Tuesday.
Yeah, and what's amazing too is in that description after his resurrection, it talks about how he told Mary not to touch him for and it doesn't really explain why, but when you understand the calendar, because it says 8 days later, then he goes and sees the disciples. They're able to, Thomas is able to touch him and stuff. Well, when you count on this calendar, 8 days later, you come to first fruits of barley, which is really interesting. It's also interesting that falls on a Sunday. And that's something that I didn't piece together. It's just another one of those examples until I was familiar with this calendar, because you can literally take Bible passages like that, count the days, and then count them on this calendar and find, if something falls on a feast day or something like that. So what is first fruits of barley?
According to the Dead Sea Scrolls, there are 4 festivals of first fruits. The first one is barley, and that's the Sunday after Passover week. And of course, that's where we have that marked on the calendar. And then exactly 50 days later, there is what we call Pentecost. And we call it Pentecost because Pentecost, Penta meaning 50. And we assumed, and we're taught by the Pharisees from the Talmud, that that's the only 50 count, the counting of the Omer. The Dead Sea Scrolls say, well, no, there's 50 days in between the first fruit cycles. So there's first fruits of the barley, and then Pentecost, we call Pentecost, is first fruits of the of wheat, and then there's a 50-day count to the first fruits of the new grapes, and that'd be first fruits of new wine, and then a 50-day count to the olive crop, which is the first fruits of oil. And so, and then you've got the week of the wood offering, and then it starts the high holy days. So they're all together. But each one of these 4 first fruit festivals are connected with the age of grace in some way, and they all fall on Sunday. What was interesting to me is, there's this age-old debate that who changed the Sabbath from Saturday to Sunday? We adopted paganism. We're evil. We're horrible. This kind of thing. And you see that in different writings in different places, but there's no reason to assume one way or the other, and there wasn't really anything written of Christian-wise about we changed it or we didn't change it or there's two of them or whatever. It just kind of is there. And you go back and you see things like in this calendar, you'll see like when Jesus gave the famous message on Matthew 24 about the end times, 24 and 25 is one sermon. Then at the beginning of chapter 26, it'll say, then he said to his disciples, it's the same exact time. He says, in 2 days or 3 days, whatever it says, is the Passover. So you go back and you look up, in that case, Passover is always on Tuesday, right? 2 days before. It's a Sunday service. So we see that Paul always went into the synagogue on the Sabbath to witness, but he always went to church to teach his people on Sunday. Jesus always had a teaching service to believers on Sunday, went into the temple on the Sabbath to witness. So you see the same pattern, and I thought for the longest time Jesus had invented it, and Paul just continued it. But as we see with the scrolls, that's always been the case. There's always been Sunday festivals and Sabbath festivals. And so it's all part of the prophetic plan. So nobody really changed anything. It's just that when we entered the age of grace, we start doing things on, with believers on the believer's day. And so eventually there's not, when the empire expanded and there's very few Jews around here to witness to, we're trying to witness to pagans. We go to witness to them. If they happen to be on Sunday or whatever day, that's the day we would witness to them. So it didn't really change anything. We kind of lost that information. Again, if you know the calendar is so simple, you wouldn't have people doing whole sermons to explain it. And so that's why it kind of disappears.
Yeah, and what's really interesting is you mentioned too all these extra festivals, because Leviticus gives us 7, and but there's a Dead Sea Scroll, the Temple Scroll, that gives us 12. Some people say 14, and I actually have a new book coming out later this year called The Lost Prophecies of Qumran, and so people can watch Skywatch TV, look for Defender Publishing, it'll be published through that. But in that, I talk about some of these new festivals that you have laid out here in the calendar, and you mentioned some of them. Like, for example, in the second month, there's a second Passover, which is for and that actually you can find explained, but it's for people who couldn't make the first Passover if they're out, journeying somewhere, or if there's some good reason why they couldn't make it, if there's a war or something, they have another chance. But you also mentioned this counting of the Omer, and you see these on the Saturdays between those 4 festivals. What is an Omer, and what was the counting? Was there an actual ritual that they would do with this?
I believe so. We don't know a whole lot about it. But on the Jewish concept is they want to count to make sure, because that's actually a command. Starting from first fruits of the barley, you're supposed to count each day. And when you get to 50, that would be Pentecost. And it's really important. We know very little about the festival of first fruits of the barley harvest. But we know a lot about Pentecost now from the scrolls. The interesting thing about it is we call it Pentecost because we thought it was the only 50 count. The Jews call it Shavuot, which could be, a Sheva is a 7 or a week. So it's the festival of weeks, and that kind of makes sense because there's 7 weeks and then the next day is the festival. But that's kind of a way that the Pharisees hid its true purpose. Shavuot actually can mean Sheva. Sheva can mean 7. It can mean a week. It can also mean an oath. Like if I swear to you that I won't do something or I will do something, that's an oath I'm making to you. And the way the Essenes looked at it is Pentecost is the most important of all of the festivals to them. And the reason is because, according to their history, it's the time that God makes oaths to men.
Hot buys on heating on now with the Good Guys. Shop column heaters, panel heaters, electric blankets and more. Don't miss out.
Stan's mind-bending brand new series is a high-octane, edge-of-your-seat thrill ride.
So God made an oath to Adam. God made an oath to Noah, the Noahide covenant, as we see in Genesis 9. He made an oath to Abraham, starting that covenant, and he made an oath when the law was given on Mount Sinai. And according to legend, all of these were on a Pentecost. And they were looking for the next Pentecost in the age of grace that would start a new covenant with people. And the new covenant and that's recorded in the book of Acts, chapter 2, on a Pentecost. And when the kingdom comes, there will be another covenant, the covenant of the kingdom, and it will occur on the Pentecost after the second coming. And so they have all this stuff mapped out and everything. But it's the most important to them because they will rededicate themselves on Pentecost. And I think that's fantastic if you think about it, because we go through our ministries and our lives, and maybe we're doing everything the Lord wants us to do, and maybe we're not. Maybe we're sinning, maybe we're not. But at least once a year, we should stop and say, how can I do this next year better? Lord, guide me into doing or not doing a certain thing. And you can rededicate yourself. And I think that would be a fantastic thing for all of us to do on Pentecost. Now, they would rededicate themselves to the Mosaic law for that covenant, but they're awaiting the new covenant. And we're really excited about it. They talked about it a lot. As a matter of fact, the community rule, most people think of that as a collection of do's and don'ts. If you're going to become an Essene, it's here's the do's, here's the don'ts, we're done. Well, it's got that in there, but it actually contains the ritual that they do on Pentecost. And it actually contains the history of why they did what they did. For instance, when the apostasy hit, they said the Holy Spirit told their prophets to move out to a place in the wilderness, and somebody from their order would actually fulfill the prophecy of Isaiah about a voice crying in the wilderness, preparing the way of Messiah. And of course, that would be John. So all this stuff is in there. And the really cool thing is, my favorite part of that ritual, it really details a lot of dedication and seriousness to the Lord. But one of the pieces, it's in the beginning, it says, this is for you to recognize sin, to recognize righteousness, to start following the Lord, and several things. And one of them is, it actually says that they want to welcome our brothers from the age of grace into the kingdom.
Wow.
And it's just really cool. Whoever wrote this particular copy, writes this, and he knows he's probably not going to live long enough to see the first coming. It's 100, maybe 200 BC, something like that. But he wants to make sure that we who read this thing know that we're welcome. I just thought that was really cool.
Yeah, definitely. And it makes me wonder, the timing of all of this coming out has been fairly recent. I mean, some of this stuff is just within the past few years. And it makes me wonder, is the reason that because time is getting short, the rapture, second coming, all that kind of stuff is going to be happening soon, possibly, and maybe we need this information now, and maybe that's why it's coming out. So that's really exciting to me. After Pentecost, we have Count to New Wine, and that's another festival that's talked about, but the in the Dead Sea Scrolls. But the problem is, the problem is that the Dead Sea Scrolls are fragmented, and so we don't get a whole lot of information. From what we know, what is New Wine, and what does it have to do with, from the little bit that we can piece together?
It's really neat, and you can understand why they changed stuff. Going back to this for a second to the Passover week, the Pharisees taught that it's the Passover, or the first fruits of barley is the Sunday, right after Passover, and the Essenes taught it's the Sunday after Passover week, so it would be one more week. The Sadducees, on the other hand, taught that it's the day after the preparation day of Passover, so that Wednesday or Thursday. And it's interesting to me because if we follow the Sadducee way of doing it, you eliminate and don't talk about the last two, and then you change the date of first fruits, which means you change the date of Pentecost also. All of a sudden, there are no Sunday festivals. And I think that's planned that way. I think it was really interesting because we've got a lot of data now on the Sadducees and where they started and some of the things that they did. Amazing stuff from the scrolls. But with that in mind, we have these, and they talk about these point to the age of grace. And I understand Pentecost definitely would, with the rededication. We saw it with the giving of the Holy Spirit, the tongues, and all that kind of stuff. But the interesting thing about it is you go back through the Old Testament and you see traces of all this. For instance, at the very end of Judges, I believe, it talks about the festival of new wine being in Shiloh and what happened. And there's a lot of things like that. And when Nehemiah, at the end of the book of Nehemiah, when they come back, they put all the paganism away and they want to do everything exactly the way Moses did it. So they created rooms in the temple for the festivals of wine, not wine, but barley, wheat, wine, and oil. And so you see all these things. They knew about that, but somehow it's been kind of cut out or put away. But the interesting thing about it, the Festival of New Wine is associated with weddings. And just like a lot of times we have a June wedding, and some people say that's paganism, other people say it's just tradition. But a lot of people get married in June. It's just the thing to do. And what had happened was, you can see this back in Judges, there's a Festival of New Wine, and the virgins come out to dance. And then hopefully they get someone to ask them to marry them, and that whole thing starts. And you see that in the book of Judges, and it's kind of a forgotten festival, but it's always on the 3rd of Av. If you go for the counting, it's going to be the 3rd of Av. And what's really cool is, now that we know that, you're reading John chapter 2. Jesus goes to a wedding in Cana. If it's a traditional wedding, there's a really good chance it's on the 3rd of Av. Festival of New Wine. May or may not be, but the majority would have been.
Well, it even says the 3rd day.
Yeah, especially if it's an upper type society when you have to do everything proper, you'd wait till Festival of New Wine. So it goes in there. The first couple of verses in John chapter 2 said it was the 3rd day when the wedding occurred. So that tells us it's the 3rd of Av, which tells us it's the Festival of New Wine. And again, a long story short, they run out of wine. Jesus turns the water into wine. That's his first miracle. And it's not just a miracle of, grape juice or wine, and everybody debates on what that might have been. And they forget about, why did he even do the miracle to begin with, whatever the miracle was. And it points back to the Festival of New Wine. So the Festival of New Wine is talking about two people becoming one, and like a wedding, a man and wife, single, become one couple. And so the teaching on it somewhere along the line is the whole idea of Jews and Gentiles becoming one in Messiah. And you can understand this because if the Festival of Oil, for instance, teaches us on prophecy, that's very, very important. The Pharisees said that prophecy doesn't happen anymore, so don't worry about it, and things like that. So if you change Pentecost to the giving of the law in the weeks, and there's nothing about oaths or a new oath, a new covenant coming, and then you get rid of the Festival of New Wine about the two becoming one and leave the dirty Gentiles alone and forget about prophecy, then everything continues as it is and they retain their authority. But if you look at these things and you think, wait a minute, there's a new covenant coming when Jews and Gentiles are one, that's not going to fit with the Pharisees, and it's got something to do with prophecy. Well, what did the prophets say? That leads you back to the Dead Sea Scrolls, which are anti-Pharisee. So you can see why they want to very much quiet that down. And it's the same thing when you say a 364-day calendar, that's going to make you start looking in places they don't want you to look. So what's interesting to me is, in the Talmud, there are 4 things that are forbidden under a curse. If you do these things, you're cursed by the rabbis. Number 1, if you read Isaiah 53, well, that makes sense. If you read Daniel chapter 9 and try to figure out when Messiah comes, well, that makes perfect sense, because you read that and start thinking he came and he was supposed to start a new age, a new covenant. That means the rabbis are out and we got to start looking for this guy, So, and one of the other things was reading anything of the current establishment, which is Dead Sea Scrolls. And the last one, which really surprised me at first, is you can't read anything that talks about a 364-day calendar. That's what surprised me, because I understand the first 3 would be devastating to them, but who cares what calendar I use? Why would they even care? That got me looking at the calendar, say the same thing again. It's like, they don't want me to do that? Why? Let's go do it and find out. That's just a normal human response. So it's like, there's got to be something in the calendar that's devastating to them. And once you learn how to work it and see that it works for the Old and the New Testament, and then you see these festivals and realize what they point to, that's the reason why they banned it.
Yeah, and we see that all over in the calendar and in these festivals that and the first fruits festivals and other things that have been obfuscated throughout time. The next one on the list is first fruits of new oil, which actually is in a week, a full week, where because right after that you have wood offering, so you have a solid week here in. It would be our August, September, but to them it's Elul. So let's start with the first fruits of new oil. I know there's even less that we know about that than new wine, but from what we know, what's first fruits of new oil?
Well, again, we have to piece it together. And one of the things that the temple scroll said is it called the first fruits of new oil, the first fruits of virgin oil, which is new oil, but the thing is, oil is used for food. If it's the really good quality that tastes good, it's used for food. If it's the yucky quality that doesn't taste good, it's used for lighting oil lamps. And so the question is, what are we talking about here? And in the temple scroll, it mentions the festival because that's when they get the oil in. But the oil that they get is specifically for the lighting of the lamps in the temple, not for food. So it's talking about light and prophecy and these kind of things. And when you realize that and you go back through the New Testament, all the scriptures that talk about Jesus, you're a light, you're set on a hill, you shouldn't be hid. Peter talks about we have a more sure word of prophecy, the day star which shall arise in your hearts, and all this associated with light and prophecy. And it's really interesting. I know there's a lot more to it than I know, but it's just like if we looked at the Seder about the Lamb being crucified for our sins, the crown sacrifice, the three gods, or the Trinity, and all the details in the Seder that point to Messiah, you can look at the ritual and you know what it means. So what we need is the rituals that are done on those festivals, and those have been hidden really, really hard. So we have pieces about them, but nothing about that. When we get those rituals, I'm sure we'll be able to figure it out. It'll be really clear to everybody. But right now we're just piecing it together. So dedication with the Holy Spirit with Pentecost, new wine is one new man coming together. We're brothers. We show that by our love one for the other, but we still stand up by truth. And then the light of prophecy. And I think it's interesting because the Pharisees and Sadducees taught that the prophets of old, the gifts stopped. They don't happen anymore. And the early Christians said, oh, no, they continue. And the Essenes said that. The Essenes were known to the people as being saints, healers with their herbal medicine and everything, and also prophets that were 100% accurate. And so it's interesting to see that. You can't, a group of people can't fake that. You can look at a person claiming to be a prophet and maybe catch him in a lie, but not a group like that, and everyone knew it. One knew it. And from the New Testament, we know the gifts continued. So we've got people today that say the gifts have stopped, there's no more prophecy, there's no more this. Not according to the scrolls. The church fathers also. So if they're not happening in your church, you're either not looking for them or the Lord's just not doing it at the moment, but it's not that it's not going to happen in the future.
Yeah, it's amazing to think about in terms of prophecy, because something else with oil, it points to the two witnesses, because when they're described in the Old Testament and the New, they're like the lampstands and talks about oil and stuff. What I find interesting, this kind of struck out to me, is you have the first fruits of new oil, and that's definitely has something to do with prophecy, maybe the two witnesses, and then after that you have wood offering. And for each 6 of these days, you have two tribes per day listed out. I think 2 is interesting because 2 witnesses, but also there's an old Jewish tradition about the coming of Elijah. And some people think that Elijah might be one of the 2 witnesses, but that he'll do something with figuring out the tribes again, something with the tribes and figuring it out. And it's interesting that the day after first fruits of new oil, you have this wood offering thing and all of the tribes are listed out. I don't know if it means anything, but that to me was interesting. And we get a little bit of information about the wood offering from things like Josephus, but also in the Temple Scroll. What was the wood offering?
Yeah, I know, Han. 95% took the vaccination. The free. I'm pretty sure it's 95% took the first vax, and the percentages go lower second and third. So a lot took the first vax. So
That I'm not sure, other than the practical aspect of they need wood for sacrifices, they need oil for lamps, they need all wheat and barley and all that stuff. And the first fruits, what a first fruit festival is basically your crops are coming in. And so now I've got all of my wheat, my barley, my oil, my whatever for those crops. And the whole idea is that the Jews are not supposed to partake of this year's crop until they tithe. So they take 10% of the best and give it to the temple, and it's used for food or whatever for the next year. And so that's the whole concept of first fruits, giving your first fruit tithe. So in this case, on a practical aspect, they need to store up wood for all the sacrifices to be done. And that's part of it, I'm sure, but I'm sure it's got other things to do. Wood, sacrifice, the cross. I'm not sure why we have it 2 by 2. There's lots of speculation on that. But again, at least we have them listed and which 2 tribes and which days.
Yeah, it's interesting to think about it and read about in some of those ancient sources. Yeah, Josephus mentions a little bit about it, which is basically what you said. It was each of those days 2 tribes would come and bring wood to keep the altar burning for the next year for sacrifices and things. That brings us to now the fall festivals, which these we've already known quite a bit about from the Bible and stuff like that. But in Tishrei, in the month of Tishrei, which is our September/October, we have first we have a Tekufa Tishrei. This year it'll be September 14th. And we talked about Tekufas already. And then the next day is Trumpets, or Fall Day of Remembrance, excuse me. Trumpets, Day of Atonement, and Tabernacles, and then at the end of Tabernacles, Great Day. So Tishrei is really a month full of things to look at. Was there anything apart from what can already be known in Scripture in the Bible? Was there anything with these that jumped out at you from your study into the Dead Sea Scrolls? Any new information, or it wouldn't be. It's new to us, but it wouldn't be new. It'd just be recently uncovered information. But anything from the Dead Sea Scrolls about trumpets, Day of Atonement, Tabernacles, or the Great Day that especially jumped out at you?
Not really. About the closest thing is the whole idea that on Yom Kippur, you have the ritual of what we call the scapegoat. And it points to Christ and an antichrist, or a Messiah and an anti-Messiah. The anti-Messiah gets destroyed at the end of this, and then the rituals and things that happened, or the miracles rather that happened. And that seems to enter us into the kingdom age, which is what the Tabernacles seems to indicate. Jesus talked about many of us will sit under the sukkah, under the vine, with Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob in the kingdom. And so we're looking forward to that. But the one thing is we call that a scapegoat. It's actually called the Azazel goat. And just that in itself, and the ritual there, tells us a lot. And there's a lot of history about the Nephilim and the Nephilim pre-flood wars and the genetic stuff and everything. Pretty detailed history in the scrolls. And the whole connection with Azazel, the fallen angel, and the scapegoat is pretty interesting. So again, we have a time when eventually all evil is destroyed and the kingdom comes, and we're definitely looking forward to that.
Yeah, absolutely. And, like I said before, this calendar really helps with exploring some possibilities prophetically. I mean, we can't know for absolute sure that, when things are going to happen, but it does kind of give us a clearer picture. I went through like a lot of the day counts and stuff using this calendar. A lot of it fits. I mean, actually, I couldn't find anything that didn't fit in some way or another. Now, there's different possibilities. I explored the possibility in my upcoming book that the Antichrist desecrates the temple, possibly on the Day of Atonement. And with this calendar and using the day counts that we get in tandem.
One dose, 78%. That's still a pretty high percentage. It only takes one jab to get you in trouble.
with the Moedim cycles, and it's actually cool that you get both things. So you have the day count, which is literal calendar days, but then you get Moedim cycles, which is festival to festival. But it's one possibility where that event might happen on that day, and there's several things like that which I find really interesting. So after Tishrei, we have we have a lot of the other stuff that people are probably already familiar with. There's not a whole lot that happens in the winter months. I mean, we do have like Hanukkah and Purim and stuff like that. But then we finally get to the end, and I just want to, we already did talk about the leap week, but I just want to show people kind of what the last month looks like, because you have an extra week here. Now, there was some, you had to kind of figure out how to calculate this, because wasn't there some challenges to figuring out if it's a full week or if it's like 3.5 days or 3 days here and there? Wasn't there something with that on how to figure that out?
Yeah, the basic ways of doing it, and I did this in my calendar book. I put down each one of the theories. And for a leap something, you have to either have a leap day or a couple of days, whatever, to get to the equinox to start the year over, or you have to have a leap week. And then when you start the leap week is somewhat debatable, or you have a leap month. There's really no other ways of doing it. The leap month is associated with the moon cycle, which the scrolls say is paganistic. So what we have is the two main theories is like you just add a couple of days or a day at the end of the year. And so New Year's would always start on March 20th, for instance, right on the equinox. And that's one way to do it. But if you think about it, that breaks up the 7-day cycle. Same thing as what we're talking about. And the other thing is, it seemed good, it's logical, and it seemed to be more accurate than everything if you didn't care about the 7-day cycle. But once those were all pieced together, we have in the Dead Sea Scrolls a set of a calendar, basically starting from the beginning going 5 years, and then another calendar going 6 years. And a couple of those, one of them actually, you can see it starting over with the next cycle. So that tells us, number one, that there's no extra days in between the years for the first at least 5 to 6 years. And so that tells us that we're not adding a day or two or whatever every year to get back to the equinox. And so 5 and a 6 year cycle, it turns out if you do the leap week, depending on comparing it to Gregorian, whether you either have 1 or 2 leap years in that cycle, or 2 or 3 rather. Anyway, so it's every 5 to 6 years you would have this cycle flip, and you'd have an extra week. So it's an interesting thing like that. Now, the only debate currently is when do you put in that extra week? Some people would say that the starting of the year always has to be after the spring equinox, and that would get you up to a week off. The way I'm doing it seems more logical. It's give or take 3 days with the cycle, because Enoch basically talked about the fact that it's the pointer and it's the most important part. So I think getting an entire 7 days off either way would not be a good idea. I could be wrong. And if I'm proven wrong, it's really easy to go into the PHP code on the website and tweak 2 numbers, and get it to shift. So it's a work in progress. I think that's the most logical way of doing it. It's the only thing we're not absolutely sure on, but I think we're pretty sure on it.
Yeah, me too. That seems to make sense to me. Well, that's basically the whole calendar. I mean, of course, it's bare bones basics. You have teachings and books on really all of these, everything that we've talked about today, full in-depth materials available if people want to look more into this.
Hi, Lynn, good to
where
see
can
you.
people watch your show, get your books, follow you online? Where can people find out more?
Well, we're on YouTube, BibleFacts.org. That's my website. So if you just go to Bible.
I was always good with math, codes, puzzles, you name it. I found this.
Okay, let me just do something for a sec.
You can see it right here on the map.
Looks like the numbers of Crazy Man drew on a cell phone.
I cannot believe you are my accountant.
Gary, what's going on?
I'm playing the lottery, and I won $15,000.
Why didn't you just tell me?
This is no time to risk it.
Yes, it is.
What? $312,000.
Sorry, guys, I'm changing accounts.
BibleFacts.org.
I'm just changing accounts so I can give Lynn and Tracy a wrench. So, Lynn, I'll give you one first. Add as moderator. Backtrack to Tracy. Hang on, guys, bear with me. There's Tracy. Add as moderator. Get off this account and go back to the other. Hang on, guys. Switch accounts. 28 subscribers. I've picked up 6 subscribers. Interesting. I didn't know that.
But I think you might be able to see it on the up here in the corner. But if you go there, you can go to anything that we go to. So we have currently a YouTube channel. That's our main thing. We're also on Gab for comments. And then we have a channel on for videos on Gab and on Rumble. We haven't really used them much. We're waiting for everybody to get the live streaming part so we can put it all together. But anyway, if you just go to BibleFacts.org, we have a store page with all of the books. I've written 33 books at the moment. And so we're working on other Dead Sea Scroll type studies. And Monday nights, usually on YouTube, we have a study in the Dead Sea Scrolls. So we're going through pulling pieces together, just learning stuff. So anybody who wants to can join us.
Excellent. And I highly suggest that everybody does. If you've enjoyed the content that you get in this episode today, you're going to love everything that Ken puts out. Also, keep watching. I think people are going to be seeing more of you, people from the Skywatch audience. And I'll just leave it there for now. We'll announce more later as time progresses. But if people out there, if you follow me because you see me on Skywatch or whatever, be looking forward to seeing more from Dr. Ken Johnson. Thank you so much for joining us on the show today and going through this amazing calendar. And thank you for putting this together. I mean, you've done a phenomenal job. I don't even know how you do all that computer programming and stuff. That to me is like, learning a different language. And I really appreciate you taking the time not only to put that together, but to come on the show and kind of explain to all of us the basics of just how this calendar works.
Well, thank you for having me on.
Absolutely, anytime, and I'm sure we will have you back on again. So everybody watching, again, this whole episode is free. Usually we do a free version and a more in-depth study for Daily Renegade.
Okay, guys, this is pretty interesting. I hope you can see the subtitles. I'm not sure if you can. Let's wait and see. Okay, guys, this is Pope Francis. I hope you can see the subtitles. If you can't, I'll have to sack it. Here we go.
Dear brothers and sisters, excuse me because I speak in Italian, but I am not speaking English. But I will speak no Italian, no English, but carefully. È una lingua più semplice e più autentica. E questa lingua del cuore ha un linguaggio e una grammatica speciale. La grammatica.
Yeah, sorry to hear that, Lynn. You got to be careful in the shower. Hope you get better.
Semplice. 2 regole. Ama Dio, soprattutto, e ama l'altro perché è il tuo fratello e la tua sorella. E con queste 2 cose andiamo avanti. Io sono qui con mio fratello, il vescovo fratello.
Okay, you can't come in.
Siamo amici da anni. E lui mi ha detto del vostro convegno, del vostro raduno. Con piacere vi invio un saluto. Un saluto gioioso è nostalgico. Gioioso perché a me dà gioia che voi siete riuniti per lodare Gesù Cristo, l'unico Signore, per pregare al Padre e ricevere lo Spirito. E questo dà gioia perché si vede che il Signore lavora in tutto il mondo. È nostalgico perché succede come nei quartieri fra noi, no? Nei quartieri ci sono famiglie che si vogliono e famiglie che non si vogliono, famiglie che si uniscono e famiglie che si separano. E noi siamo un po', mi permetto la parola, separati. Separati perché i peccati ci hanno separati, i nostri peccati. I malintesi nella storia.
Guys, look what he's saying. There's a secret agenda to deceive you. Man. Wow.
La strada
Hang on.
di peccato.
Let me take it back a comment because I stopped it. I gotta press go.
Separati perché i peccati ci hanno separati, i nostri peccati. I malintesi nella storia, ma una lunga strada di peccato comunitario. Ma chi ha la colpa? Tutti abbiamo la colpa, tutti siamo peccatori, soltanto uno è il giusto, il Signore. Io ho la nostalgia che questa separazione finisca, che ci dia la comunione. Io ho nostalgia di quell'abbraccio di qua, nel quale parla la Sacra Scrittura, quando i fratelli di Giuseppe, affamati, sono andati a Egitto per comprare.
Unbelievable. Guys, this is actually stunning. I haven't watched this completely, but this is absolutely stunning.
Poter mangiare. Ma andavano a comprare, avevano i soldi, ma non potevano mangiare i soldi. E lì hanno trovato qualcosa più del pasto, hanno trovato il fratello. Tutti noi abbiamo dei soldi, i soldi della cultura, i soldi della nostra storia, di tante ricchezze culturali, anche religiose, della tradizione diverse. Noi dobbiamo trovarci come fratelli e dobbiamo piangere insieme, come ha fatto Giuseppe.
Guys, I am dumbfounded. I haven't watched this through because I wanted to watch it with you guys. This guy is saying everything we knew about him. This is absolutely, oh my Lord.
Pianto che unisce, pianto dell'amore.
Okay, we missed a couple of lines there because I couldn't help myself and talk.
Noi dobbiamo trovarci come fratelli e dobbiamo piangere insieme, come ha fatto Giuseppe, quel pianto che unisce, pianto dell'amore. Io vi parlo come fratello e vi parlo così semplicemente, con gioia e nostalgia. Facciamo crescere la nostalgia, perché questo...
Oh, mate, this is nuts. Wow. I can't believe he's saying this.
con gioia e nostalgia.
He's the man of sin mentioned in the
Facciamo
Bible,
crescere la nostalgia.
and the Catholic Church is the mother of all whores.
Ci spingerà
Oh, we knew it.
a trovarci, abbracciarci e a lodare Gesù Cristo come unico Signore della storia. Ti ringrazio tanto per sentirmi. Ti ringrazio tanto per lasciarmi parlare.
Yeah, Diane, it's from 3 years ago. Yeah. I can't believe this. This is stunning.
Ti ringrazio tanto per lasciarmi parlare la lingua del cuore.
Yeah, Diane, that link's the one.
E ti chiedo anche un favore, di pregare per me perché ho bisogno delle vostre preghiere. Io prego per voi, lo farò, ma io ho bisogno delle vostre preghiere e pregare al Signore perché ci unisca tutti. E avanti, siamo fratelli, ci diamo spiritualmente questo abbraccio e lasciamo che il Signore finisca l'opera che Lui ha incominciato. Perché questo è un miracolo, il miracolo dell'unità è incominciato. E dice uno scrittore italiano, il Manzoni, famoso, dice questa frase in un romanzo, un uomo semplice del popolo dice questa frase: non ho trovato mai che il Signore abbia incominciato un miracolo senza finirlo bene. Lui finirà bene questo miracolo dell'unità.
What did he just say then about his wound?
Chiedo
Did he just mention his head wound? No way.
un uomo semplice del popolo dice questa frase: non ho trovato mai che il Signore abbia incominciato un miracolo senza finirlo bene. Lui finirà bene questo miracolo dell'unità.
He just said because my wound is about to be healed. I don't think it's a physical wound in his head. I think it might be talking about the Catholic doctrine. I'm not sure. That's so I don't know it.
Trovato mai che il Signore abbia incominciato un miracolo senza finirlo bene. Lui finirà bene questo miracolo dell'unità.
His wound's about to be healed. He's about to get authority.
E io ti benedico. E fratello a fratello. Un abbraccio. Grazie.
Guys, that's the heaviest thing I've ever seen scripturally. That, wow, he just said he's everything we said he was. Man, I've got to watch that a few times, not right now, but I'm really stunned. Oh my, he's admitted he's the man of sin in the Bible. Wow, you just heard him. That man, I'm really stunned. What do you think, Gabe? You stunned?
Interesting, yeah. I'm feeling sick.
Okay.
Thanks for taking my call, brother.
Oh, it's my honor, Josh. Thanks for having me.
To start off, can you introduce yourself and just kind of talk a little bit about what you do, what your research has been involved in, where people might have heard your name before?
Yeah, okay, thanks. Well, primarily, I'm a longtime pastor, senior pastor of a church on the Gulf Coast for our area, fairly large church. I've been the pastor for, at the time of us talking today, I've been the pastor there for going on 35 years. Prior to that, I spent 10 years, a little over 10 years in Florida law enforcement officer, as a Florida law enforcement officer. The bulk of that 10 or 11 years was spent in 2 different sheriff's offices under 3 different sheriffs, patrol officer, criminal investigations, etc. So a lot of life experience. But in my experience in the ministry, I've done a lot of preaching and teaching, particularly on this topic we're going to discuss today. And I've written a lot to it in books published by major Christian publishers, one of them in my most favorite, Defender Publishing, and several books and a lot of research. And again, I mean, that doesn't make me the
Okay, I'll read the
expert of all
comment
experts,
section.
but
Exactly what I'll do.
What I'm talking about biblically. And I'm not pulling what I'm going to say. I'm not pulling it out of my back pocket. I mean, it comes from making scriptural connections and as well as scientific connections. So that's kind of my background into all of this. But thanks for having me.
Yeah, absolutely. So leaving aside the UFO and alien abduction phenomena for the moment and just looking at the question, could life exist on other planets? Is there anything in the Bible that would preclude the possibility that there might be life somewhere on other planets?
Yeah, you know, the way you've asked it, is there anything in the Bible that could preclude the possibility? My answer is no. There's not, in my opinion. And I think I even quote Dr. Michael Heiser and several others who are more learned than I am, who have come to the same conclusion, and that is this. Look, I think the Bible is Earth and humanity central because that's probably the center of God's heart and his whole plan for the universe. But and there doesn't seem to be a mention in the scriptures of what we would think of as human life on another planet that needs to be redeemed, and Jesus had to go to different planets and die on a cross and rise from the dead. There doesn't seem to be anything that says that. But in the broader scope of the thing, you and I both know, because this is a great thrill of scripture to you and I both, and that is we know that there are, I mean, scientifically speaking, multiverses, multiple dimensions. And the Bible tells us that. I mean, it tells us there's heaven, there's hell, there's paradise, there's the eternity, there's the chasm between paradise and prison, the holding place for the, I mean, and all of these things are just said. And we see angels coming and going from different dimensions. I mean, when Abraham said he looked up and saw 3 men coming, well, then we find out later it's 2 angels and the Lord himself. Well, so the question is, where'd they come from? Did they live up in the mountains? I mean, does God secretly live in a cave somewhere and he just comes down every now and then and shows us himself? Or did he drop down out of the sky? Or did Abraham see a UFO land and they all got out? Got out? No, they're walking through portals. They're coming through dimensions. And now with the study of quantum mechanics and quantum physics and quantum science, we understand that this is so. Now, having said all of that, that then leaves open the possibility that God has done other things in other dimensions. That's none of our business right now. And so I am not going to say, as Dr. Heiser would say, I'm not going to say what God can't do or hasn't done. So anyway, if you just go strictly by the scriptures and that's all you knew, and if you didn't know anything about multi-dimensions of reality other than what the Bible says, you know, we might be able to make a hard call.
Yeah, and that's a good point. But by the same token, if he didn't say that, wouldn't YouTube take it down against community standards? I don't know about that. I wish I spoke Italian.
Statement and say, no, there's nothing else besides us. But that's I'm not prepared to say that, and I think if we discovered human-like life on other planets, I mean physically and literally, I'm not talking about demonic deception and all that. We're going to get to that. But if we discovered that somehow and God allowed us to, or even if we get to glory and the Lord says, now let me show you what all I've done all over the place and all through all the dimensions, it wouldn't surprise me at all, because is God able to do that? Yes. But anyway, that's a long answer to a short question, but I know that's a lot of people ask that question. So
okay, I just worked out how we will know if the words are fake or not. He mentioned Joyce Meyer and Joel Osteen. No matter what language you talk, that's how you pronounce their names. So if he's not talking about himself and his wicked ways, and Joel Osteen gets mentioned and Joyce Meyer, well, why are they getting mentioned if he's just talking about what a good bloke he is? Let's do it again. Let's do it again, guys, if you don't mind. Hang on, history. Okay.
speak no Italian, no English, but carefully. Dear brothers and sisters, excuse me because I speak in Italian, but I am not speaking English. But I will speak no Italian, no English, but carefully. È una lingua più semplice e più autentica. E questa lingua del cuore ha un linguaggio e una grammatica speciale. La grammatica semplice, 2 regole. Ama Dio soprattutto e ami l'altro perché è tuo fratello e la tua sorella. E con queste 2 cose andiamo avanti. Io sono qui con mio fratello, mio vescovo fratello Tony Panna.
Okay, just said Nefrello twice, and the subtitles say very, very twice. So far, the words he's saying in Pig Latin English match up to the subtitles.
Siamo amici da anni. E lui mi ha detto del vostro convegno, del vostro raduno. Con piacere vi invio un saluto gioioso e nostalgico. Gioioso perché a me dà gioia che voi siete riuniti per lodare Gesù Cristo, l'unico Signore, per pregare al Padre e ricevere lo Spirito. E questo dà gioia perché si vede che il Signore lavora in tutto il mondo. È nostalgico perché succede come nei quartieri fra noi, no? Nei quartieri ci sono famiglie che si vogliono e famiglie che non si vogliono, famiglie che si uniscono e famiglie che si separano. E noi siamo un po', mi permetto la parola, separati. Separati perché i peccati ci hanno separati, i nostri peccati. I malintesi nella storia, ma una lunga strada di peccato comunitario. Ma chi ha la colpa? Tutti abbiamo la colpa, tutti siamo peccatori. Soltanto uno è il giusto, il Signore. Io ho la nostalgia che questa separazione finisca e ci dia la comunione. Io ho nostalgia di quell'abbraccio di qua, nel quale parla la Sacra Scrittura, quando i fratelli di Giuseppe, affamati, sono andati a Egitto per comprare, per poter mangiare. Ma andavano a comprare, avevano i soldi, ma non potevano mangiare i soldi. E lì hanno trovato qualcosa più del pasto. Hanno trovato il fratello. Tutti noi abbiamo dei soldi, i soldi della cultura, i soldi della nostra storia, di tante ricchezze culturali, anche religiose, della tradizione diverse. Noi dobbiamo trovarci come fratelli e dobbiamo piangere insieme.
Okay, guys, you can say that he's not really saying that. They're putting different subtitles on, but everything they're saying is actually what happened. They did deceive us like that. I'm just waiting to see the Joel Osteen and Joyce Meyer comment, because if he says it in clear English, Joyce Meyer and Joel Osteen, why would he be talking about that if not in the context their names mentioned in? So let's see what goes on.
Come ha fatto Giuseppe,
Hang on, I've got to take it back a bit now.
dobbiamo trovarci come fratelli e dobbiamo piangere insieme. Come ha fatto Giuseppe, quel pianto che unisce, il pianto dell'amore.
He just said Amori. I'm pretty sure Amori means dead in Italian, and he was talking about Mary. Hear that again.
Giuseppe, quel pianto che unisce, il pianto dell'amore.
Amori.
Io vi parlo come fratello e vi parlo così semplicemente, con gioia e nostalgia. Facciamo crescere la nostalgia, perché questo ci spingerà a trovarci, abbracciarci e a lodare Gesù Cristo come unico Signore della storia. Vi ringrazio tanto per sentirmi. Vi ringrazio tanto per lasciarmi parlare la lingua del cuore. E vi chiedo anche un favore, di pregare per me, perché ho bisogno delle vostre preghiere. Io prego per voi, lo farò, ma io ho bisogno delle vostre preghiere e pregare al Signore perché ci unisca tutti. E avanti, siamo fratelli, ci diamo spiritualmente questo abbraccio e lasciamo che il Signore finisca.
Okay, guys, I don't know about that. Be true, I'll give you that.
That question, so I wanted to be thorough.
Oh, that's a great answer. Yeah, definitely. So talking about the
響きが交わる双曲
I was close, Lynn. Morte. Did he say Morte or Amori? If he said Morte, he was talking about Mary being dead. I wish I had the patience to go back and look at it again.
About the alien abduction phenomena, what do you make of that? Is this demon attacks? Is this hallucinations? Are these actual?
Okay, Han, you know a flaw I picked up in that? He said he is a man of sin. We know he's not the man of sin. He's not the Antichrist. We know him as the false prophet. And the fact that he labeled himself wrong sort of gives me a red flag. So you guys could be right. It might not be what he said.
Aliens abducting people. What do you make of the whole alien abduction phenomena?
Okay, yes, and no. I think some of us do.
Yeah, you can't imagine a false prophet saying those things. That's true, but don't they have to tell you before to make the spell stronger? If they let you know what's going on first and they still pull it off, the spell's more powerful. But you're right, he's not the man of perdition. He's a false prophet, and there's a difference. And the fact he didn't know that probably wasn't the Pope talking.
Illusion. You know, I mean, it just has to be. I mean, humans are very complex, and we're in a fallen world. And out of the billions and billions of us, bless their hearts, there are people that are delusional. And, you know, and other people seeking some kind of attention, and other people that are on drugs. And, you know, we know that. So leave that category out. when we get down to the double or triple handfuls of what seem to be real brain twisters, like, you know, all the.
Okay, Han, you did say if he really said that, don't you think all Christians would know it? Do you remember his choir singing, "O Lucifer, the Father of Christo, who shed his peaceful light on the world"? So he sang Lucifer is Christ's father, and the Christian world didn't go nuts over that. Yet we saw him sing that in Latin, or his choir anyway.
Test you can run them.
Christians are too lazy to take it on.
These people have been run, and they seem to be sane and rational people, and they take lie detector tests, and they're put under hypnosis, and they keep coming up with the same stories. I mean, that gets a little freakier to people. So let's just pretend like, for the sake of this conversation, that those are absolutely real, and that experience actually happened to these people. So then what's the explanation?
Froze up. Hang on, guys. No, Kat, you're not coming in.
Nation. And I think, and we'll get into this much deeper, I think it's demonic. I truly do not think it's actual physical humanoid type beings from other planets that have developed the technology and the curiosity to be so far more advanced than we are, to come to us for the sole purpose of trashing the gospel of Jesus Christ and examining us sexually and messing with our minds and terrifying us. I can't even imagine that a culture that advanced that would be what they're up to. See, that sounds more like demonic activity. But anyway, so that's my answer. I think some of these experiences are real. Look, it's like people that get involved, they get sucked into the occult or witchcraft or seances, and they come out of them scared to death saying, I promise you, I saw an entity, a being, and it was my great-great-granddaddy, and I know, and I saw, you know. Well, but the Bible has an answer for that. You're watching demons posing. You know, they're posers. They're mimicking, they're masquerading. Even Satan himself masquerades as an angel of light. In fact, I discussed this in one of my books I've written with Defender called Masquerade. So I think some of these experiences have proven to be as real as we can measure them to be real. But what does that mean? And what I'm saying is, I think more than likely, biblically speaking, and even scientifically speaking now, more than likely, we are dealing with interdimensional experiences of some kind of an entity, and I would say an evil entity, and I would say that would be demonic. You see, the Bible, people ask me all the time, do I believe there's other life out there in the universe? My answer is absolutely, and people freak out. Really? You're a preacher. You believe in aliens and little green men from other planets? And I say, well, you didn't ask me that. You asked me if I believe in life out there in the universe. The Bible tells us there's the angelic realm, there's the demonic realm, there's power behind it. Satan is called the prince of the power of the air. There's technology behind it. Again, prince of the power of the air. And in the last days, you know, all kinds of signs and wonders, and fire will be called down from the heavens, and there will be signs in the heavens. You know, something's going to happen. Jesus said people will faint with, well, that's the King James. They will die with heart attacks when they see the terror that's coming upon the earth. That even the elect could be deceived in the last days. See, there's some kind of terrible, terror-invoking deception that is demonic. The Bible says that's coming in the last days. I think those kinds of verses, studied in their context, probably what may point to some type of a UFO disclosure. Somehow this UFO phenomena, I believe, has to be involved in the last days deception, because it's so ubiquitous throughout ancient history, right up to modern day times. Our military's talking about it now. Our government's talking about it. Other militaries and other governments in the world are talking about it and revealing videos now in this age of video technology wonder. And how could it not be?
Can't find the work-life balance? Make your move to Lake Macquarie.
I mean, if it's not humanoid beings from other planets, then it's demonic. And a lot of ufologists who have spent decades believing that it was humanoid beings from other planets have now backed way off of that and have gone on public record, as you know, saying, no, after all these years, we believe these are entities that have always been among us, always been here, probably interdimensional. They are probably malevolent. They have nothing good designed, and several of them, who I don't think are even believers from after reading their biographies, say this phenomena we now believe is more in line with what the Christians would call demonic activity. So I think that's what we're dealing with, brother. I mean, you know, again, I only know what I know, and everything I know that the Scripture says and what modern science says, and then these people that have devoted their lives to studying this matter have said recently in writing and on film. I think we're dealing with interdimensional entities that mean no good to us. And the Bible would describe that as demonic activity.
Yeah, definitely. I can totally see how this is, whatever's going on, it's definitely harmful for humans. Speaking of which, do you believe, some people talk about an alien breeding program. Do you see anything about that in the Bible? Do you believe that accounts of that are true, or is this something else that may have been misinterpreted?
Yes and no. Now, I'm going to define that so you don't think I'm walking the fence. But no, I don't see anything in the Bible that in those words, black and white, speaks of that in the last days. However, there is a huge connection, and this gets a little complex, but I'm going to make it simple. I've spoken to it in several of my books in great detail, referencing scholars and scientists. So again, all of us scholars and scientists and authors can be wrong. So I'm not saying that just because I have a lot of references behind me that I'm 100% right, but I'm saying to your audience here and to the viewers that I'm not pulling this out of my back pocket. Okay, so no, the Bible doesn't say in the last days there will be aliens that will be breeding with humans. But here's what Jesus said about the last days. It will be just like the days of Noah and just like the days of Lot. In Luke 17, he includes both of those. In Matthew 24, he says like the days of Noah, and he punctuates both of them. And both times, Luke 17 and Matthew 24, he's speaking to totally different audiences, 4 or 5 months apart in different locations of the Roman Empire. So this was a big deal. I mean, Jesus gave us a huge clue about almost not a timeline, but a graphic kind of chronology of the kinds of things that would happen and about when they would happen. Say, Carl, how can you know that? Because Jesus said it would be sort of like, kind of like Noah. No, he didn't say that. He said it'll be a metaphor of it will be Noah. No, he didn't say that. He said it will be just like the days of Noah. Now, in reference to your question. So we go back and we read about the days of Noah, and I don't just go to chapter 6 through 11 of Genesis, because Noah's mentioned in several more places in the Old Testament. He's mentioned throughout the New Testament. He's mentioned in Matthew 24, he's mentioned in Luke 17, and he's mentioned in several other places in the gospel. He's also mentioned by Peter. He's mentioned by the writer of Hebrews. I mean, so when you pull it all together, we start with that scary little verse in Genesis 6 that said, and in those days, what days? The days of Noah. The sons of God came unto the daughters of men. Now, this could be a 4-hour teaching, and I've written several books. Dr. Michael Heiser is the king of all of this. He's written several books, The Unseen Realm being, I guess, his masterpiece on this. But that term, as most of your audience probably will know, it comes from the Hebrew phrase B'nai Elohim, the sons of God. And that specific phrase is only used 5 or 6 times in the Old Testament. There are other phrases that are similar to it, And in English, when you're trying to translate from ancient Hebrew, sometimes the translations aren't that great. But every time that exact phrase is used, it is interpreted in every English translation as divine beings or angels, except in Genesis 6, where that same phrase is used, but almost every scholarly translation translates it literally. When the sons of God, they don't say when the angels from another realm came unto the daughter, or when divine beings entered in through a wormhole from another realm and came unto the, it just says the sons of God. Because what it is, it's so freaky to our mind, because then now it involves potential sexual involvement, you know, and there would go to the breeding thing, or to the very least, I write in my research of this, at the very least, I think it means that there was something. I'm just going to use this word. It's a modern word. Something technological going on. There was some. Well, what do we find in the UFO captivity phenomena? They say, well, I was probed and prodded, and my sexual organs were examined, and and they scoped up into me, and examined the womb and the uterus and the birth canal. And I mean, you'll hear these things. And so I can kind of envision that Satan and the demonic realm that was in the process of this whole fallen creation since the garden, there was something about the birth process and
Well, this is all the stuff we decided not to move.
How much of it would you like to disappear?
All of it.
And the womb and the ability that humans have to create themselves that God gave to us, like a Xerox machine. We can zoom off copies of ourselves, and so there was some kind of curiosity, maybe even some kind of ability. People say, well, angels can't have sex with humans. Well, actually, the Bible doesn't clearly say that, either in the Hebrew or the Greek. Some will refer to Jesus where it says, well, in heaven they're neither given or taken in marriage like they are. But that says nothing about reproduction. It really doesn't. He's just talking about the institution of marriage as we know it, and the necessity for marriage as we know it in a world that's perfect and not fallen. None of that will be a necessity, is what Jesus is saying. He's telling the Pharisees, you're thinking of it all wrong. You're thinking of it strictly earthly. But when we are in glory, it's not just another form of earth. It's a glorified everything. No more sin, no more death, no more pain, no more death, all these things. So when we get back to the Genesis account, we run into this thing that was either one of two things by the wording there. It says, because then they came unto them and had children by them. Well, in the most normal use of the Hebrew language and the English language, that would mean like we know it in our mind of producing children. But could it have been technological? I mean, we think we invented test tube babies and CRISPR-Cas9 technologies and and genetic editing. I don't think that the demonic realm has ever looked at these kinds of things and said, gee, we didn't know that could be done. I can't believe these humans figured something like that. No, I think this knowledge has been around, the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. There's good things from CRISPR-Cas9 and genetic editing and mRNA research, but there's evil that can be attached to it as well. And you remember what was Satan's temptation to Adam and Eve? You can be like us who, the angelic realm, the sons of God. You can be like us. And what some translation says, you can be like God, and that's because the word Elohim, it could be either the multiplicity of the angelic realm or God himself, the creator of it, and it just depends upon the context. But in either way, Satan is saying, you can know all the stuff we know, all the stuff about creation and everything, if you will sit down at my feet and let me eat of the fruit I will bring to you. So it's got to be, Josh, and then we get to Peter and Jude in the New Testament, and we read very clearly about some class of divine beings that are now being held in the deepest dungeons of the prison of Hades, hell, prison, waiting for the great judgment of the last days. And both of those cases in Jude and Peter, it extrapolates back with imagery of the days of Noah and the flood and Sodom and Gomorrah kind of activity. It says that. So that seems to connect directly with that thing that happened in the days of Noah in Genesis 6. So the point is, I told you this was complex, but I don't, I could just say yes or no to your question and we move on, and then people would be divided and freaked out. So I'm trying to give some contextual foundation, scientific and biblical. So I know that the concept of alien human breeding is huge on the internet, and some would have us to believe that about half of the 8 billion people on the planet are hybrids, and that may be, but you hear Jesus say it's going to be just like the days of Noah. So what does that mean? It means it almost has to mean, in my humble opinion, I could be wrong, but it almost has to mean that either there is some kind of literal, physical, in the last days, some of that demonic presence is going to be released. And you read in the book of Revelation about the chasm coming open and the demonic powers coming out. You read about the demonic that lead the kings of the earth astray. I mean, that's in the book of Revelation. You hear Paul talk about in the last days, doctrines of demons will flood the earth. And that word doctrine doesn't just apply to biblical teaching. It applies to teaching of facts and truth and knowledge. So facts and truth and knowledge of demons will flood the earth in the last days. So it's got to mean, when Jesus said it'll be just like, and those are his words, not my words. Just like means just like. It's got to mean that Genesis 6 is included, which has got to mean one of two things, in my opinion. Either there's some kind of demonic outpouring wherein these angels that have been held in captivity. See, can all the angelic realm procreate with humans if that was ever possible in the beginning? The Bible doesn't tell us. But if they could, and if that's what Peter and Jude are talking about, there was at least a class that could. There was some type. So there's either going to be that happening again in the last days, because Jesus said it'll be just like, or it will be attached to some kind of technology wherein, watch this, all flesh becomes corrupted again. That's what happened in Noah's day. And brother, we're the first generation since the days of Noah to see it happening again right before our eyes.
Mate, he's 100% true, isn't he, guys? We're the first generation to see this happen since Noah. Man, I like Chris Putnam.
mRNA
Carl Gallup,
technology has the ability to deliver complete corruption of flesh. In fact, the chief medical officer of Moderna, he's on a TED Talks video as we speak. I heard him say, we are rewriting the code of life. We are feeding new information, as your genome is like an operating system. He means like a computer. We're feeding it lines of code. We're switching off switches and switching on to other switches. It's astounding. And this has only happened in the last 10 years, that. And then prior to that, CRISPR-Cas9, the ability to cut and snip biologically the genome and recreate things, and using that to grow human livers inside of a pig, they think, and things like that. Brother, that's what Jesus said. So alien and human breeding, maybe, and if that's interpretation is proper from Genesis 6 and Peter and Jude, and that somehow that happened and God said,
when you run a business, you get ahead because of the support around you. Tyro,
you've stepped way over the line, and he put them until the last days. That seems to be the inference. And then in the last days there's an outpouring. Well, then that could happen, I guess. Now, there are people that I know that I think probably came from aliens. I'm being funny. I mean, listen, the human race is amazing, because there's all colors, there's all shapes and sizes, yet you cut us open and we're human. We're human, But so it would be easy, if this is happening, for the demonic to hide that within 8 billion people. all over the planet. And there's still places on our planet where really no human foot has ever set foot. Well, now we have satellites, and but still we haven't gotten down, put our feet on the soil, and many, 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 many millions of miles of territory all over the surface of this globe. It would be fairly easy for the demonic to hide that kind of process, if that's what's happening. But I say this, regardless, I mean, there may be people listening saying, oh, you're both nuts. That's crazy. That's just pure science fiction. Well, just remember, almost everything we're living with today was pure science fiction 20 years ago, the internet included, cell phones and CRISPR-Cas9 and mRNA and everything. It was all science fiction just 20, 25 years ago, but it's not now. We're living it. So I would be careful to dismiss it as just pure science fiction simply because your mind wants to shut down on it. And I would say that at the very least, though, there's some kind of demonic infusion of technological knowledge in the last days that's going to do some corrupting of flesh, animal and human. And when you think about this, my friend, when I draw people's attention to this, it usually snaps something in their brain. A light bulb comes on. Think of when God leveled his curses upon Adam and Eve and Satan. He leveled a curse upon Eve and the birthing process. And Satan's curse was pretty close to it. He said, your curse is, from the womb of a woman, the birthing process, will come a seed, a child. God's saying, I'm going to use a child to defeat your kingdom. And he's going to come from the womb of a woman. And it's going to be directed by heaven's throne, and he will crush your head. And I want to add these words. The same kind of junk you were trying to pervert, I'm going to use it to destroy you. I mean, that's what I see. Now, again, that's just my speculation. That's not the word of God. But everything I said prior to my speculation is in the word of God. So I think it all goes to the question you asked. I'm sorry I took so long to answer it, but this is one of those questions that's near and dear to me. People ask me all the time. And to me, it demands a little bit of biblical foundation and scientific foundation to wrap people's heads around it.
So in your opinion, what exactly are UFOs?
Okay. Well, science has spoken to this. You've asked my opinion, but science has spoken. And of course, you can take UFO only means, as you know, and your audience knows, something that's flying in the air that's unidentifiable at the moment. Well, there's been a lot of explanations, and some of those explanations have turned out to be true. It's a military aircraft, it's technology that's being worked on, it's just something you thought you saw that you didn't. Maybe it was just a jet airplane, the sun caught it just right and kind of eliminated the wings, and it looked like a sliver going through the air, and that was actually an airliner, swamp gas and all this stuff. And believe it or not, some of that has panned out that that's exactly what it was. But we're still left with what a lot of experts now call are UFOs, residual UFOs, meaning all of that's left over from everything we've been able to explain and verify. Not just explain away, but explain. Okay. So now we're left with the residuals. Well, we can talk about examples in our lifetime as we're doing this show. Residual UFOs are those that the U.S. Navy can't figure out, and they've got them on video. Okay, that's residual. Why? Well, because the number one superpower in the world, with arguably the best technology in the world, there are a few others that have technology approaching ours, but there's still a lot of it they've stolen from us, China and Russia, and they could have some more advanced stuff than we do. But the most technologically advanced society that the planet has ever seen looks at these things. They try to track them, they try to chase them, they try to keep up with them. Not only can they not, but they're being described as objects of flight. They don't know what they are, so those are UFOs that are defying the laws of earthly physics. Now, scientists describe it that way. Pilots, Air Force pilots, Navy pilots describe it that way. Ufologists are describing it that way. Experts in physics and scientists are looking at this stuff and they're saying there's nothing on earth that can do that. Yet there it is. You can see it. You can hear the guys live talking over their radios, freaking out. I mean, You know, people say, well, it was all staged. Well, that's pretty elaborate staging, and I guess it could have been, but just take it at face value. When you pull all this stuff together, those are what we would refer to as UFOs. That is, are UFOs, residual. That's not swamp gas. It's not an airliner with the sun shining on it at an angle, and is documented. And you know, I don't think I'm stretching this by saying thousands of hours of this documentation over the last several decades. This has been going on, which also precludes it from being, or excludes, excuse me, from being just simple, some kind of technology we're working on. You know, people thought well, that's DARPA stuff. We're just not allowed to know. Well, DARPA's got some stuff that, you know, we're not allowed to know. But the problem is these kinds of videos and or sightings have been going on
Up to 1 in 3 people risk developing shingles in their lifetime. Talk to your doctor about shingles today.
on from military personnel for decades. And we didn't have anything that even approached that technology decades ago. Nobody on the planet did. Now, even decades later in our time, we still don't have anything that approaches it, even though we could envision that maybe DARPA or something like that is getting close to something like this. But I mean, we're talking about spacecraft they saw, or craft, unidentified craft they saw that was just zipping along near the surface of the ocean and then instantly went straight up, be out of the atmosphere, and then back down, then went under the water in some cases, and then reemerged, and all at the speed of whatever, I don't know, they couldn't keep up with it. They said it was unearthly, it was inhuman, but yet it was obviously guided by intelligence. So that's what UFO means. And that's the kind of stuff we're interested in. Where is that coming from? What intelligence is behind it? Is it really beings from other planets that are so technologically advanced that they're down here showing off? Speaking of which, and it goes straight to your question again, but a lot of these ufologists that I have documented in my books, pointing behind me because they're on the shelf behind me, I have documented in my books, have actually and literally said that now they've come to the conclusion these are not humanoid kind of beings from other planets that are just more advanced than we are. These are interdimensional entities, they call them. And several of them have said, and they're showing off. They want us to see them. They want us to know, and this sounds like a horror movie, they're here. And I think this ties into the last days, and we'll talk about that more in a moment in prophecy. I truly do. And I think the scripture speaks to it metaphorically, giving us foreshadowing of this kind of thing. I could be wrong, but we'll talk about that. But so anyway, that's what we're talking about when we say UFOs, and that phenomena is real. It's captured on film now by credible people, with many other credible people, scientists, etc., looking at it, people that deal in technology, and they're bumfuzzled by it from all the reports that have been released to us.
Yeah, speaking of these films and things that keep getting released, is there actual, I mean, I guess that would count as physical evidence because it's a video, and, you know, of course, videos can be faked or, you know, whatever, there's
Yes.
always that. But is there physical evidence to show that there is something physical going on here? And if so, what do we say to Christians or to anybody who says, well, there's no physical evidence to this phenomenon whatsoever?
That's just an untrue statement. Yes, there is physical evidence. And as you said, the videos, huge physical evidence, eyewitness from multiplicity of pilots seeing and tracking it at the same time, recording it. But as you said, I wrote about this in Masquerade, I believe, and I quoted Dr. Michael Heiser, and he quotes others and has a whole resource, and I used all of those and kind of conglomerated them together and put them in my book to quickly answer that question, because it's a good question and people ask that. But the answer is a resounding yes. There is physical evidence. It's been collected down through the years. Or somebody would say a spacecraft landed somewhere, and then they would go back and check, and sure enough, you know, there was burned up grass and or whatever radioactive material in the ground, and you know, and these kinds of things are recorded. Now, and people would say, well, Well, the demonic can't do that. What do you mean can't? The demonic can do anything that has to do with technology. You know, the demonic can't create something out of nothing like God can. They can't create life out of nothing. They can manipulate what's already there like we can. We can take a genome here and a genome there and do some CRISPR-Cas9. But where did the genome come from? Where did the DNA come from? Where did how does the DNA, how does protein molecules know how to communicate to create a human being? That's that intelligence behind it all, you see. And so you know, when you're dealing with this phenomena of physical evidence, yeah, there's a lot of it. At least enough, you know, we don't have like truckloads and truckloads of it, but there's enough of it from around the world over time to say, yeah, this is not just psychological stuff, or I saw something in there and my eyes fooled me. No, we've captured it on video. No, we've gone to some of these spots and recorded radiation and saw imprints in the ground. And people say, well, why would the demonic do that? To announce they're here, to deceive us, to masquerade as little green men from other planets. See, that's the perfect way. I mean, if I'm Satan and I want to get the whole world, we already know the whole world is manipulated most by fear. Fear. Now, love overcomes fear, and love only comes from the heart of God, but most of the planet does not have a heart for Jesus Christ and the Word of God and God. So they're motivated by fear. We see that in the pandemics and, you know, and the closing down of everything overnight. Fear, we're all going to die, fear. Well, Satan knows this. He's watching this. He's watching even the church's reaction to all of this right now. And so if you can imagine that bringing something like this to the planet, and then like a criminal who's trying to mislead would leave behind DNA evidence, or would put a gun there, but it wasn't the gun used, or they would wipe the fingerprints off, or whatever. You know, they would leave physical evidence, maybe on purpose, to mislead or to misdirect the investigators. Well, if we humans can be that evil and conniving, how much more the demonic realm? How much more the demonic realm? That's where humans learn their evil from. If they're not saved, they learn it from Satan whispering in their ear and from demonic manipulation. So yeah, there is physical evidence. It has been recorded in various ways. And my explanation for it is, why would they do that? I just gave it. Because it's a deception. It's a masquerade. We're being groomed. We're being set up for that thing that Jesus spoke of. And I don't know when Jesus said this, he was talking about UFOs. But when he said there's going to come a deception, guys, in the last days, that could even fool the very elect, if that were possible. And people will die from heart attacks when they see the terror that's coming upon the world. You know, I mean, listen to the language. So let me give an example. Whenever I talk about this, I use this example.
Where you bank can change the world.
Think of what if the Lord was going to come this week in his kingdom glory. Well, let's say a few months from now, but Satan knew it. And so he had to try to pull off his last great deception. And Satan knows his time is short, by the way. Revelation 12:12 says that. He's filled with rage, and you can see it all over the planet. He knows it's coming. So to try to hold on to it, he's got to create this global fear and panic to cause everybody to bow down to his man, to whom he's going to give supernatural powers to call fire from heaven, to deceive, images that will move and talk. I mean, it's all in the book of Revelation. What does that mean? We don't know yet, but in our minds, this is the point I'm getting to. In our modern minds, in this day and time, if the world is allowed to go on for hundreds of more years, we can't even imagine the technology that's coming. Just like 20 years ago, we couldn't imagine the technology we're using right now. Okay? So, but if it's not allowed to go on for hundreds more years, let's say this is it. This is kind of the apex of the technology. Then in our life, if Satan is going to deceive the whole world, now watch this, Josh. even the very elect. And all that word means is people like you and me. The word elect doesn't mean perfect. It just means we are believers in the Word of God. We believe in Jesus Christ as Lord and Savior. He's the coming King. We're filled with the Holy Spirit who leads us into all wisdom and knowledge, who takes away fear. God has not given us this spirit of fear. He's given us the Holy Spirit. Okay, we're the elect. But Jesus said, but even Josh and Carl, if they're there during that time, could be deceived. If that were possible. Now, when he puts that qualifier there, here's how I interpret it. It's highly possible that Josh and Carl will be deceived for just a little bit. But it's not possible for them to stay deceived because they have the spirit of truth in them. But this thing that's coming is so big that people are going to die when they see it. They're going to have heart attacks. And even God's people like Josh and Carl will be protected from that. But for a minute, we might just be startled out of our pants. And then we say, wait. And the Holy Spirit says, and to us, and then we begin to say, this is what Jesus was talking about. Okay, what could that be? Now, here's my question. Here's the $1 million question. In the world we live in, brother, it's going to take a lot to fool Josh and Carl. You know, I'm not saying we're the most brilliant people in the world, but think of all the technology we already know about. I mean, holographic images, we can project in the sky. I mean, you know, all of the technology we have. What's it going to take to make Josh and Carl come right up next to a heart attack if we see it? Or to almost question our faith for a little bit if we see it? What would it take? The only thing at this point in human history that I could imagine would be something like, envision this scenario. I know this is going to sound science fiction. It sounds like a movie, but watch. What if you and I right now, we concluded this interview, both of us walked outside. You're in one part of the United States, I'm in another part. We walked outside. We looked up in the sky, and it was filled with spacecraft that were like 4 and 5 football field lengths. I mean, thousands, tens of thousands of them hovering over the earth. People would be screaming. I mean, sirens going off. All militaries of the world would be called to action. I mean, can you imagine? There would be people dying of heart attacks. Nobody would stop and say, oh, that's a hologram, but it's all over the world. You and I both would be startled. Maybe even, I'm going to go ahead and admit, I'm a pretty brave guy. I was a cop for years. I've been shot at people, but I'd be scared for a little bit. If I walked out and saw that, I'd be more than startled. But I don't think it would be long before the Holy Spirit of God would begin to minister to my heart, and I would begin to say, oh my gosh, it's here. This is it. This is the great deception. So that's just one scenario, and I'm just pulling this out of my head and out of my back pocket. But it's connected to scripture utterances from Jesus and from the Old Testament and from the New Testament about the last days. And I'm going to tell you something else I've written about that fits to this, brother. And again, it's a biblical speculation, but I went back, even some of the classic scholars saw this possibility and wrote about it with the best language they had. It's in my book, Masquerade. Remember when Jesus is asked about the last days, and in Matthew 24, he's going through this litany, and one of the things he says, let me tell you something else that's going to happen. And I'm going to paraphrase it a little bit, but you put it in modern English, he said, all over the earth, there are going to be false messiahs. And there's going to be false prophets that are going to be coming, talking about these false messiahs coming. And they're going to say, look, he's out in the desert. No, they're over here. They're on the Temple Mount. No, they're over here. No, they're in the seat of power over here. He says, no. He says, when the true Messiah comes, the Son of Man, it will be like lightning from the east to the west. You won't be able to miss it. Now, I did some deep search into those words, and I've got this study in the book of Masquerade. And then I went back to some of the classical scholars, 100 years ago, 200 years ago, just to see any inkling. I actually ran across several that said he is not talking about the false prophets and messiahs that we would think of now. He's talking about something in the last days that we cannot even yet imagine that has to do with entities. One guy said the entities masquerading, and that's why I put it in my book, because they use the word, the title of my book, masquerading as messiahs and saviors to the world. And they will first be announced by people saying that they are coming I mean, they actually said this a couple of hundred years ago. And they didn't say UFOs or aliens. They were just talking about this. And I thought, oh my gosh, the prophecies are already going all. I mean, people write about it. The movies are prophesying it. Video games are prophesying it. You know, the zombie apocalypse and the UFO invasions. There's a new one out right now as we're speaking. I forgot, it's called the end of the time, or the last war. I think it's called the last war, something like that. That's what it's called. Yeah, Tomorrow War. Yeah, it's all about, you know, this invasion of UFOs and everything. And they're prophesying. And what if that's their purpose? As these ufologists who have been studying this for decades are now saying, they want us to see them. They are preparing us for something. What do you think their message is going to be? We are your savior. We're going to keep you guys from killing each other in this nuclear war you almost started. Bow down, worship up.
The Beds R Us gigantic June sale is on. Australian-made mattresses on sale. Beds, bedroom furniture and more.
Worship us. We are the reasons you're here in the first place. We created you, or whatever. We are your savior. You don't believe it? Let me show you some signs and wonders. Revelation says that whole system of the Antichrist and the beast system will be empowered by the dragon, who is Satan. He will give them his power. Well, what's his power? He's the prince of the power of the air. You understand? So when you tie those things together, again, I'm not dogmatic, because there's no place in the Bible that says these words. In the last days, UFOs are going to come down out of this air. They're going to land, and these people are going to get out, these human-like things, and they're going to claim to be the saviors of the world. No place says that. But when you take all that we know from science, all that we know from physical evidence, all that's happened in our lifetime, all that we know from scientific manipulation, all that we know about ubiquitous global evil, all that we know about what Jesus said, people dying, that is so terrifying, you know, people being, even God's people could be deceived if that were possible. When you take all of that and cram it together, and then you look at what the movies, I mean, listen, I'm not speaking about individuals, but Hollywood as a whole and everything that has spawned off of it, you know, different movie making projects. Back in Hitler's day, they realized propaganda, man, propaganda. We can tell people what we're going to do and get them prepared for it, so when it happens, they won't freak out so much, but yet we can still do it to them. That's what that was all about. Hollywood has seized upon that. How many times, you know, you can get on the internet and find these videos that are made about a movie is made that says certain things, and then 30 years later, it happens to the letter. And people are freaking out. How did they know that? Well, I think they either set it up and then did it, self-fulfilling prophecy, or it was demonic knowledge that was infused into the hearts and minds and imaginations of the creators of those films. So if that's true, then if these false messiahs being spoken of by false prophets, Jesus talks about in Matthew 24, happen to be those that manifest themselves in the last days, that come through these demonic wormholes and portals. The words wormhole and portal are not in the Bible, but different dimensions are, and excursions and encroachments from those dimensions, that's mentioned in the Bible. I mean, this might be what we're being set up for, which is why you're examining this.
It's amazing to think about that. We could.
Okay, guys, that one's out. One more video goes 40 minutes, I think. Yeah, 40. Yeah, I'll finish with this, guys. Will take me to 3 hours exactly, nearly.
At the Natural Chip Company, we do all we can to live up to our name. We use the best Aussie potatoes and the finest real ingredients. The Natural Chip Company. Great tasting Aussie chips, naturally.
Smoothie. Crunchy. Makes me go munchy.
Dead Sea Scrolls is something you've always had an interest in as well. What first led to that interest? How did you first get introduced to this topic, and what was it about it that you found so appealing?
Well,
the Dead Sea Scrolls,
Is that too loud?
I should say that I was exposed to them in church, but not in a churchy kind of a way. I guess might be a way because they were always this sort of nebulous, arcane set of documents, that the preacher would drop, every now and again, or you'd hear about it in Sunday school or something like that. It was they might as well have been written in Elvish, and stocked away in some cave in Middle Earth. But no, my exposure to them, just in terms of concept and name, was fairly early on, and I'm almost certain that it was a combination of my dad talking about who has taught Sunday school for decades, told me about this other arm of Judaism that existed during the Second Temple period in the first century, when Jesus was around. The Essenes, the Sadducees and the Pharisees were the ones that got top billing, but the Essenes were these strange fellows that don't get mentioned, except for in the margins and the periphery of whatever lesson might be put forward. And the other exposure, I'm almost certain, was under the late Dr. George Knight, who was a mentor of mine, and he was the brother-in-law of our pastor, and would come over and do Bible studies. And he was an archaeologist too, and so a lot of his field experience helped to illustrate some pretty salient points in those studies. And I'm almost certain, as a youngster, I while picking his brain after these study sessions, I was probably the only 8 or 9 year old in a room full of men, in these January Bible studies that he would do, and he would graciously, answer all my questions. And I'm almost positive that part of my exposure was then, but it really wasn't until I got into college and I began to take Bible classes, theology classes, a history of biblical lands and the church, that I began to really sort of dive into the Dead Sea Scrolls proper. And I think really, as we talked about on our last show, the expedition to Banyas or Paneas, Caesarea Philippi, that sort of set me down on this road, really sort of opened that world of the Dead Sea Scrolls up to me, particularly the apocryphal material that had to do with Mount Hermon, and that in a nutshell was kind of my introduction to the Dead Sea Scrolls. But as I say, it wasn't until I was actually prepping to leave for that expedition to Banyas that I actually started reading, stuff like the Book of Enoch and the Genesis Apocryphon and Jubilees and some of the other stuff that's in the apocryphal cache of the Dead Sea Scrolls, that shed light directly on the significance in the Jewish mind as to why that region was important on a cosmic level.
Yeah, definitely. And I think that's so cool how pivotal but mysterious this.
Okay, Lynn, I'll be hanging up in about 30 minutes myself.
Group really is. Can you explain the landscape of the time of Jesus? Who were the main Jewish sects that you mentioned? Pharisees, Sadducees, and Essenes. And why is it that we don't actually see the word Essenes anywhere in the Gospels when they were clearly a well-known group? They were influential in the community at the time. What's the story there in the Gospels? Why don't we see Essenes mentioned?
Well, of course, as listeners will probably be familiar with, the main three, and there certainly were other sects of Judaism.
Yeah.
But particularly during such a tumultuous time as the first century AD, some of those are combinations of religious and political movements like the Zealots. But the big three were the Sadducees, the Pharisees, and the Essenes, with the third one being the lesser of the three in terms of number.
Yeah.
But not influence, as I think you and I would agree on. But the Sadducees were really they were the temple bureaucracy. They were the overarching sort of theocratic court, if you will, consisting, of course, of priests. And the Pharisees were they're often referred to as the scribes and elders in the Gospels and the New Testament. And these were basically the lawyers and scholars of all of the, not just the Mosaic Law, but all the minutiae and commentary that went along with them. That's why they're the most haggling of Jesus's. Haggling is probably not the right word, but the most annoying of the crowds that Jesus draw, because they have all the little higgly-piggly questions for Jesus. And then you have the Essenes, who broke away as early as the 4th century, but probably into the 3rd century BC, excuse me. They had seen that the sort of corruption, it was a different kind of corruption in the Second Temple period, but this sort of, my take on it is that they saw the legalism that was growing was basically bastardizing the state of Judaism that Yahweh had presented to the Jews. And they were like, we're out of here. We're not going to be doing this anymore. And so they leave to the desert regions on the borders of the Transjordan and set up these communities.
Beacon stock take sale is now on with reduced prices on everything you see in store and online. Pendants, lamps, fans, enjoy massive savings on all stock. Sale on now.
We are here for those who need to keep track of complex but vital data. Meet Whatagraph.com.
These monastic communities, in essence, in which they practice a form of Judaism that they felt called to practice. It was an expectant. Just from reading the literature, it was a more expectant, messianic-driven, apocalyptic-driven sect of Judaism than the other two were, which is why I think that a number of them, I think demonstrably, even not only from written material that we find from Jewish authors, but also outside authors, prove that these.
So yeah, that watch. So look.
The Essenic Jews actually became, at least in some of their numbers, became Christians eventually because of the theology and the ritual that they practice, and a lot of the phraseology that they share with figures in the New Testament like John the Baptist and Jesus.
Yeah, and that was something that was really fascinating in my research as well, just seeing that, like, once you really kind of get a grasp of the basics of the Dead Sea Scrolls and then what this group taught, what they believed, who they were, you actually do see quite a bit in the New Testament about it. I mean, in Acts, for example, I've come to believe that when, and I could be wrong on this, but I've come to believe there's at least the possibility when Paul was on the road to Damascus that might not have been Syria, but might have been Qumran, because in the Dead Sea Scrolls they actually called their community Damascus in a couple different places, and it makes more sense why Paul would have to go to the temple to get letters of authority or permission to be able to go to Damascus to persecute followers of the way. You know, if that's all the way in Syria, I don't know if they would need permission from the temple in Israel. That you know, so there's little things like that when you take them and kind of group them together, they all pile up and kind of form this new picture. So how did these groups form? So we have a period of about 400 years. It's called the Silent Years between the Testaments. So we have the end of the Old Testament. Everything makes sense. You know, we kind of get the story. We know what's going on. And then you turn the page to the New Testament, and all of a sudden there's Pharisees and Sadducees. The whole structure in Israel is completely different. And on the surface, it doesn't seem like there's a whole lot of explanation for that. So what happened during what's called the 400 silent years that produced these three main groups, and how did how did the Dead Sea Scrolls actually come to be?
Well, there's certainly a lot of political upheaval in the region. You know, Israel, once it's basically reconstituted, or I should say Judah, once it's reconstituted after Babylonian captivity, there are these spurts of sovereignty that the country will enjoy, but those are relatively short-lived because you eventually have you know, outside powers vying for control over this stretch of land, which has been part of the history of ancient Israel, as you well know. But one of the big turning points certainly would have been the acquisition of this territory by Alexander and his Macedonian Empire. And we're talking mid to late 4th century BC when all of that gets constituted. And of course, in the wake of his death in 325, you know, that all the territory that he controlled is sort of divvied up amongst his generals. And the Ptolemies have the Levant initially, but the Seleucids will actually battle the Ptolemies at one point and gain control of the Levant. And so for the bulk of that period, you've got, like I say, you do have interregnums, if you will, of some Jewish control, but it's mainly a Hellenistic state at this point. And you have the basically the descendants of Seleucus in this point ruling over Israel. And of course, there's another upheaval once the Hellenistic control wanes, and that's in 63 BC when Pompey, one of the triumvirate generals and a close friend of Julius Caesar, will basically take the Eastern Mediterranean and hand it over to Rome. And so at that point, it comes directly under Roman control. And the Romans, of course, cared less about how you worshipped, and because most people in the Mediterranean basin were pagans, without getting too far off base, but they valued law and order and their view of social stability above everything else, which was causing the clash in a lot of cases with the Jews. And so this is sort of the political backdrop of that inter-biblical period, as it's sometimes called, those silent years, when a lot is actually taking place in terms of you know, Jewish politics and Jewish theology. You have this is the period early on when you have the establishment of these sects of Judaism, the Sadducees, the Pharisees, the Essenes, and the lesser ones that certainly existed. But the Sadducees and the Pharisees basically were the theological overlords of Judaism at the time, and it's, you know, to the credit of the Essenes, I think they, you know, like I say, they saw the corruptive influence of the temple bureaucracy and the staunch, almost unloving execution of of Judaism as something that was foreign to what Yahweh had given to the Hebrews, and so they broke apart. Heard a call. I firmly believe they heard a call to do that. So, this sort of gives you some idea of politically what's happening in the backdrop during the interbiblical period. Like you say, if you're just reading the Bible through, and you get to the end of the Old Testament and you start into the New Testament, it's like, wait a second, did we miss did we miss a chapter or two in the book here? And without knowing something about the interbiblical period, that's what a through the Bible reading kind of feels like. But the fact of the matter is that there's a lot politically, historically, culturally, theologically that's significant that's going on during this period.
Yeah, definitely. And so the Dead Sea Scrolls themselves, are these like books from the main temple library that when these Jews or the sons of Zadok, they go by different names, but that when this group broke off, did they bring these books from the temple library with them, or did they just copy them down once they got there? How did the Dead Sea Scrolls themselves actually come to be, and why do you think that they were left there in Qumran?
Well, and you bring up an interesting point. The Essenes are many scholars believe that they're sort of the intellectual, theological descendants of the Zadokite priests, who were the, Bible students of the Bible will recall were very staunch, probably the staunchest opponents of the pagan influences against Israel at the, in the both the more so the divided kingdom period, but there's definitely some connective tissue there. Now, in terms of the copies of material that they had with them, it's probably a mixed bag with the original stuff that they took from the temple. Probably some of it was original from the temple. Some of it's I think about 35 or 40% of the Dead Sea Scroll material, that is, the material that's been found at Qumran, is Hebrew Bible material, and then you've got about 30% or so of apocryphal stuff like Enoch and the Genesis Apocryphon and Jubilees, and then the rest of it is essentially, it has to do. It's like the monastic order. It has to do with their rites and rituals and rules and things like that. All of the asceticism and ritual bathing and the mikvah and from the most sacred of rules down to the most earthly, mundane sorts of things. And so that's why I say that at least for that 35 or 40% of material that's Hebrew Bible, it's probably coming from the temple. It's probably a mixed bag. Part of their function, after all, is scribal, and so they're definitely we definitely get a sense that there were scriptura at Qumran, so they would have been copying a lot of the stuff.
These documents were discovered not too long ago, a few decades ago. So what happened? Why were these left? Because in my research, it seems like the main narrative is kind of, they say, well, there was a big persecution, so they fled and they left all their books behind. But I don't know, because it sort of seems like they became Christians and took the gospel out to the nations. They were following the orders of the Great Commission. So do you think that them leaving this treasure trove of books, was that done intentionally? Was it done kind of haphazardly because they were trying to get out really fast because of a coming persecution? Or did they have something in mind for that? Why do you think all of these books were left where they were?
Well, you can certainly argue the persecution arm, but you run into things in stuff like Enoch about this literature being written for a later generation.
Right.
How they were going, how they were going to get that material to whatever generation needed it. This was probably the best thing that the Essenes thought they could do, was to bottle it up and protect it as much as they possibly could. Because as you say, I mean, there's good evidence that many of them did become Christians, and that this sort of aha moment for me was in during the course of my dissertation. I read a number of Epiphanius's material, and of course he was an early church father who lived in the 4th century AD, and he associates the reason that I ran into them is because a group of them apparently ended up in the sort of general Bonias, Caesarea Philippi region over the preceding centuries, and he names Bacchanatus or Botania, which is the Latinized version of that, as one of the regions that they ended up in, and he associates these two groups together in terms of their theology and sort of their theological trajectory. He mentions the Essenes and their order and their practices, and he also mentions he describes them also as the Elkosites and the Nazoreans, and I believe that these are two groups that did end up converting to Christianity.
It's tax time at Bunnings Trade. Make sure you download the free PowerPass app to automatically store your receipts.
Just because of again the theological trajectory that they're taking and the way that Epiphanius is writing about them.
Yeah, it's fascinating looking into the history of that and seeing how it stretches across, into our church age today. You mentioned the Book of Enoch, and I wanted to ask you about the Book of Enoch because, of course, the Qumran community held it in high regards. How did they view the Book of Enoch during that, like the time of Jesus? How did they view that, or even the 2nd century BC around that time? And then how are we as Christians today meant to understand the Book of Enoch? Because I think a lot of people have some confusion about this. You get extremes on both sides. You get Christians that say you absolutely shouldn't even look at it or you'll burst into flames, because it's so evil. Then you get other Christians, then you get other Christians that say, well, we need to put it in the Bible. It belongs in the Bible. It's the 67th book of the Bible. Yeah. All this ridiculous stuff. So you get these extremes. And I think there's a lot of confusion about it. So how did the Qumran community view the Book of Enoch, and how are we as Christians today meant to understand it?
Well, again, sort of drilling down and back into the theology of the Qumran community, the Essenes were they were an expectant group. They were clearly in my mind that it seems that they were clearly they did everything that they did, from leaving the temple infrastructure and going out into the desert. They did all of that because they wanted to focus on one expectation, and that was the arrival of the Messiah. You read their stuff, and it's apocalyptic. It's expecting the next chapter. In other words, it's expecting the end of this age and the beginning of the next one, and wrapped up in all of that, of course. Wrapped up in all of that, of course, is the expectation that the Messiah is going to come back on the scene. And I tend to think that, particularly because the scholarship points to the 1st century AD kind of being the zenith of the Essene community. And if that's the case, that would certainly make sense when you start to look at the kind of stuff that John the Baptist is talking about, the phraseology that Jesus is also using. Just reading it from that, it looks like the Essenes, at least some of the Essenes, recognize that, well, we don't have to wait anymore, because we've got this book that it has to be centuries, if not millennia, older than the actual writing down, because Enoch is the culmination of oral tradition, just like the entire Torah is the culmination of oral tradition. It existed in oral form long before it was ever written down. The Hebrews don't have a written language until the 10th or 9th century, the 11th or 10th century BC. And so in like manner, Enoch is kind of a culmination of all of that oral tradition. And clearly, because you get I guess to sort of use a Jungian phraseology, you get archetypes of not just the teacher or the Son of Man or the Messiah or whatever, but also the end of the age, and even the intimations of the Antichrist can be found in a lot of that. And so I think that because Jesus's ministry was so ambulatory, there would be Essenes that would be hearing a lot of this and putting two and two together. And I think we've got our guy here. I don't think we have to wait much longer for this. And so, Enoch would have been, of central importance, I think, particularly in that zenith period of the 1st century AD.
Yeah, I absolutely agree. You mentioned that Enoch is apocalyptic, and it obviously is. Do you believe that the Book of Enoch has accurate prophecy? And if so, what does it say about our time or our future? Can we glean anything from the Book of Enoch pertaining to our time today?
Again, I'm not a date setter, but by the same token, where Jesus chides the Pharisees for being able to predict when it was going to rain, but they couldn't read the signs of the times around them. I think in like manner, we can apply, the Book of Enoch to our own time. And the fact that it says that it was made for, a generation in the future, even if it isn't our exact generation, it speaks more to us than it did at the time that it was written. Then it was just a forewarning. Now it's a handbook in a lot of ways. And I think, without getting too science fiction about things, because there's such commentary, in Enoch on the pre-flood world and what's going on with the Watchers and the Nephilim, we're at the point now to where that sort of combination of practical sciences and occult knowledge that the Watchers taught humanity, we're at the point now to where we're starting to see a lot of things that blur the line between science and magic. And I think if there's any commentary, I mean, my gosh, the news about the chimera, the human monkey chimera came out, and we've been doing that probably for decades. It's just that we just get to see the surface news about that. And we're in the quantum age right now. We have super colliders that are, as we speak, probably creating artificial black holes. And even the people that work at places like CERN report very, very strange things, outside the realm of scientific quantification. Quantum computing in any other language would seem to be magic, because quantum computers dump their questions literally into other dimensions to derive the answers. So I think in a way, because of the manner in which this sort of new technology is unfolding, and perhaps even the purposes that it's being used for, I think that sort of points us back to what the Watchers were teaching humanity and why they were teaching it to them in the pre-flood world. That's one reason why I think Enoch is going to become more and more pertinent as we see more of this, being released to the public. Again, I'm not a date setter, and I'm certainly not a prophet, but again, it's hard to ignore the signs of the times. That the kinds of events that happen in the pre-flood world are starting to unfold now. And beyond that, the kind of lawlessness that was epiphenomenal of the activity of the Watchers and the Giants would seem to be pertinent as well.
Yeah, I agree. It's amazing to read through the Book of Enoch and see how relevant it actually is for our day today. And like you said, it's unique in the fact that it's more pertinent for today than it was when it was first written, which is absolutely amazing. And what's cool about it too is, we have the Ethiopic version of Enoch, and that's really extensive. We have a lot there. And then in the Dead Sea Scrolls, to me,
for those extra scary moments, Breeder's Choice. Choose better. Choose Ginger.
In my line of work, I'm judged on each plate that hits the table. Constant excellence cannot happen without a great.
To me, we have enough fragments to where you can compare the two and see they are extremely, extremely close. So much so that when people say, well, the Ethiopic version could just be fabricated or made up. It's like, well, if that were true, they would have had to have known which parts of the Dead Sea Scroll version were going to degrade, which parts were going to be left, and they would have had to fake around that. And I just don't see how that's even remotely possible. So in my opinion, based on these comparisons that we can look at, I think that the Ethiopic version isn't going to be a perfect translation, but I think it's really close. It's definitely close enough to where we can still get something from it. And so it's amazing that there is quite a bit in there about our day and what we're heading into. I'll tell you what, we're going to take a quick break, but before we do, Judd, where can people follow you online and get a hold of your materials?
Well, certainly they can look at burtonbeyond.com. The Institute of Biblical Anthropology website is tioba.org, and both of those are undergoing some much-needed renovation right now, so if people will bear with me. Facebook, YouTube. I do several programs, the Beyond Report, Quick Classics, which is sort of Greek and Roman and Jewish classics that people can get snippets of, and occasionally Antiquity X and Sunday School X, which are more visually driven. But those are the big places.
Excellent. Well, we have a lot more to talk about, but we're going to do that in the members only section right after this. Dr. Ken Johnson and I, if those of you out there are familiar with Dr. Ken Johnson, he's been a guest on before. We're going to have him back on again to talk about this calendar. But he has a website called dsscalendar.org, and it's basically an online version of the Dead Sea Scroll calendar, which is a great resource. It's for free. Anybody can use it, but it does also mean that you have to, it's not an app, it's a website. So you have to pull out your phone every time you want to look at it and scroll around and look for things. So I reached out to Ken and I said, hey, what would you think about us kind of like going into business together? But what would you say about producing a print calendar? Because I know how to do that. He already designed the calendar, so the artwork's done. I know how to get it into print and get it out to people. What do you say? And he was all for it. He was excited about it. So Ken and I worked together and produced the Ancient Dead Sea Scroll calendar in print form. And this is for this year. And it's absolutely beautifully printed. There are 8 different styles, 8 different versions of this calendar that people can get if they want to. But basically what you have is, I don't know if people can see that, but you have the Dead Sea Scroll calendar on the top with all the feast days and everything. And then on the bottom, you have the normal, just American regular kind of calendar. Even if you get this square one, the square style, you even get like pictures for St. Patrick's Day and the holidays and stuff like that. So that is for this year. It starts in March, so don't think, well, it's 4 months into the year by now, there's no point in getting one. The Dead Sea Scroll calendar starts in March, so it's a great time to pick one up. But as I said, we also have several other options. We have 3 different poster versions, which are just, they're just posters. We have 3 different versions of that. We have a desk calendar style. So this is like if you have a family member or a friend or something that has a desk job or something, this is a great gift. And then we also have this little CD case version, which is, I thought this was pretty innovative and cool, but it just opens like a CD, but you can stand it on your desk like that, and then it's you just have cards. They come out as cards. There's the calendar on one side, and then there's the American holidays on the back side, and you just set it on your desk or wherever like that. So if people want that, there is a link in the description below, and by the time this episode airs, we should have the link right at dailyrenegade.com. So if you go to dailyrenegade.com right now, you should, if I'm timing this out right, you should see a graphic right on the page on the login screen. You don't have to be a member to take advantage of this, but we'll put it right on the login screen. dailyrenegade.com, you'll see a graphic there. You can click on that, pick your calendar, and we'll keep doing this every year. Or you can go to Dr. Ken Johnson's website, biblefacts.org or dsscalendar.org, and you can see the same graphic there and get it there. Either way, it takes you to the same place, and your purchase of a calendar goes both to help support Ken's ministry and Daily Renegade. So if you already know that you love us both and you want a calendar, that's the place to go. Okay, so we are going to take a break, and we're going to pick this back up in the members only section. If you haven't had a chance yet, again, please go to dailyrenegade.com and get a membership today. If you get a monthly or yearly membership, you'll have full access to my newest film, dealing with how Christians should look at the UFO disclosure movement that's been opening up more and more in our government today. It seems like every day now we're getting new news headlines on how the government is admitting to more and more and more. Well, how are we as Christians to respond to that? And what is this connection between UFO disclosure events and major events in Israel's history and geopolitics in the Middle East? Because things are heating up there too. And these two seemingly different things converge somehow. So the film gets into all that, and I'm in it. Derek Gilbert is in it. We have Lieutenant Colonel Robert McGinnis, Steve Ciccolani, Pastor Steve, if you guys know him from YouTube and other various places. My wife Christina is in it. So it's a great lineup. It's also narrated by Zachary Lautitas. If you're familiar with that show Prison Break, he was in that. He's been in a couple other movies and stuff since then, but he actually got me and Derek's book, The Day the Earth Stands Still, which is what this film is based on. He got a hold of that about a year ago, and it really inspired him to reach out to me and Derek and then do some research on his own. So we're going to be having him on the show sometime soon because he's got some amazing insights, especially just being connected with Hollywood and seeing what's going on there.
This is a truly historic moment. It will be known as the Abraham Accord.
Ever since the news broke of the peace agreement between Israel and the United Arab Emirates, many Christians have been wondering what it all means. Is it significant? Is it momentous and historic? Or could it even be prophetic? Most importantly, after this, what comes next?
Everybody said this would be impossible.
That film, What Comes Next, it is only available for paying members, but if you want a free trial, there are still some free things for you. Most specifically, we have a free episode of The Sharpening Report right now with financial expert and Christian Terry Saka right on the front page of dailyrenegade.com, which explains the financial crisis that we're in now and how we as Christians can safely protect our assets with an actual Christian company. This company is amazing. It's basically a ministry effort for us Christians, and it's done through precious metals. So you can go there or just go to Cornerstone Assets in the link in the description below and request more information. I have some silver myself, and I believe that every Christian should absolutely be doing this instead of trusting satanic organizations and doomed to fail currency options such as fiat and the banks and all of that with your resources. And what you leave behind for your family. At least with Cornerstone, you're working with Christians. You know, you have to protect yourself, your family, your assets, and Cornerstone is the only Christian company that I trust with something so important and vital. So check it out. More information at dailyrenegade.com. Go ahead and watch that episode of the Sharpening Report. It's free for everybody, and get the information. If you haven't had a chance yet, head on over to dailyrenegade.com and get a membership today, where we will continue our conversation with Dr. Judd Burton. Members, hang on the line. Everyone else, thank you so much. Take care and God bless.
Okay, guys. Thank you for watching. See you tomorrow, guys.